Good evening, everyone, and welcome to The Proof is Out There. If Bigfoot has been around for centuries, like Native American folklore suggests, then you'd think there would be some historic photos of the creature, even from as far back as the 1800s. Well, guess what we found? It's the 1890s in Western Canada. The Canadian Pacific Railway has recently become operational. Forestry and mining operations are booming, and the wild frontier is finally being tamed. Portable cameras have exploded onto the market, and it is believed one of them was used to snap this uncanny photo. This dated, grainy, black and white image appears to show what some interpret to be a dead Sasquatch lying face down in the snow.
The picture is very old. It was taken in 1894 in British Columbia, in a very unexplored part of Canada at the time. If this is a Sasquatch in the photograph, it would by far be the oldest picture of a Sasquatch in existence.
Reports of Sasquatch-like creatures or wild men stretch back centuries, possibly millennia. Barrickman recalls an early 18th century sighting also reported from Western Canada.
In 1811, an early explorer named David Thompson ran across very large footprints in the ground that he could distinguish from that of a bear. This guy literally lived in the woods. He would know a bear print. He turned to his indigenous guides who were with him, and they say, let's follow this thing. And they said, no, man, we're not following that.
The indigenous tribes of Western Canada were no strangers to these strange beasts and named them Saskets. That's believed to be the origin of the word Sasquatch. Early sightings of these northern Bigfoots were surprisingly plentiful.
This photograph was taken along the Yellowcrum River, which flows into the Bridge River, which flows into the Fraser River. And the Fraser River is the source of one of the older Sasquatch reports on record in the area. Employees of the Hudson's Bay Company encountered a group of Sasquatches up on a cliff that were throwing rocks down upon them in 1864.
In fact, it was this company that many believe was responsible for this photo. A strange text scrawled on its back indicates the date, location, and company name, along with a message.
Some of that information on the back says that this picture was stolen from the Hudson's Bay Company, and it was one of a series. The Hudson's Bay Company is Canada's oldest fur trading company, founded all the way back in 1670. They literally owned 40% of what is now present-day Canada, and they were essentially the de facto government in this particular area.
Many wonder why this photo was stolen, and if the Hudson's Bay Company may have been keeping more photos of this creature under lock and key.
There might be more photographs out there of whatever this thing is. Is this the first known photograph of a Sasquatch, and maybe even the first known Bigfoot cover-up?
Recently released files revealed there's been at least one FBI investigation into the possible existence of Bigfoot. These files were kept under wraps since the 1970s. So if our own government has been keeping evidence like this locked away, is it really so unbelievable that the Hudson's Bay Company has been doing the same for Canada? Let's see what our experts think. First, photography expert Andrew McCarthy tries to determine if this is really an authentic photograph or some kind of hoax.
It's a little bit on the high contrast side, so a lot of details are actually lost, which isn't unusual for a photo of this time. There's no artifact suggesting anything was airbrushed in. This photo seems to be completely authentic.
Many people online have suggested that this could just be a shaggy dog of some kind. But biologist Floyd Hayes says the limb proportions rule it out as any potential canid. But we should note, Hayes thinks this creature looks small compared to Bigfoot's size and other reported sightings.
I'm not impressed with the size of this animal compared to the snowshoes. And to me, the arms don't look like they're particularly long. They don't seem to extend very far below the waist. I'm not seeing anything about the body size and shape that would distinguish it from being a human. Although it could be a young specimen of a Bigfoot.
The supposed involvement of the Hudson's Bay Company, which may have secreted away other photos, has many believing this could be part of some kind of Bigfoot cover-up. But Hayes is skeptical.
The business of the Hudson's Bay Company was to go out and collect furs and make a profit. So it seems strange that a company wasn't motivated to collect the fur and preserve it, especially if it was an unknown creature to science.
However, that still doesn't explain why the company would keep photos of this curiosity under lock and key, unless there was something truly unique about this specimen, something they weren't ready to share with the rest of the world.
Apparently some other photos were taken, and perhaps those other photos may reveal the answers to the mystery.
Our verdict? We're calling this one a potential Bigfoot. There is certainly a lot that's suspicious about this photo, and while there may be some issues with the creature's size, we know the photo is real, and our experts haven't ruled out the possibility that it could be a younger, smaller Sasquatch. But until the rest of those mystery photos surface, we may never know for sure. Now, let's talk about something much more recent. In May 2023, NASA held its first public meeting on UFOs. One of the videos presented certainly grabbed our attention, not only for what the government would reveal about it, but what they wouldn't. 2021, an undisclosed military range in the western United States. A P-3 surveillance aircraft is in the midst of a training mission when its infrared sensors begin jittering. Soon, the flight crew sees why. Before them, 3 unidentified objects appear on their cameras flying equidistant and on the same flight line. At times, they resemble moving stars traveling westward. At other times, the UAPs morph into dotted lines. The trio's movement appears unaffected by a 4th object that whizzes by below them, flying in the opposite direction. Journalist MJ Banias says this video was released and discussed publicly by the leaders of AARO, the government body set up to investigate what it calls unidentified aerial phenomena.
AARO stands for the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. And according to its former head, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, only about 2 to 5% of those reported cases end up being categorized as anomalous.
The majority of unidentified objects reported to AARO and in our holdings demonstrate mundane characteristics of readily explainable sources.
Dr. Kirkpatrick stated that the aircraft in question that was recording these objects was not able to intercept them.
But given that this video was shot by a P-3 Orion surveillance plane, we know there is much more data yet to be disclosed.
It's equipped with incredibly high-resolution infrared cameras and is designed for intelligence gathering. This aircraft is able to collect significant telemetry and data and visual data on any given target within its search radius.
But whether or not the P-3 was dispatched to specifically track these objects, that's unknown. Now, can we glean anything from where this video took place? Well, all we were told during the hearing is that this video was taken on a training mission in the western United States. But with more than 30 bases in California alone, that's not a lot to go on. So we're calling on our experts to get to the bottom of this. We start our analysis with astrophotographer Andrew McCarthy, who spots a clue in the video immediately.
There is one object I can definitely explain. On the bottom, you do see an object streak by that has a definitive contrail. That fits the profile of a plane, so that's most likely one of our own aircraft in the sky.
But what about the other 3 objects, seemingly moving in unison and without contrails?
My gut initially tells me that these might be satellites. Starlink trains are becoming more and more common in the night sky as these satellites are deployed to low Earth orbit.
Starlink is Elon Musk's network of satellites that can provide internet access anywhere on the Earth. They are launched in groups and travel as a train until they reach their operating altitude and separate.
And when they're in lower altitude, just after sunset, they shine brightly against the horizon. So you'd actually see something very similar to this.
But aviation expert Tim McMillan disagrees.
When you think of Starlink satellite, you would see as a series of a string of dots across the sky, because Starlink is a satellite chain. It looks like just a string of dots coming across here. We don't see that here.
Instead, McMillan believes the same object McCarthy saw closer to the camera is the key.
If you look towards the bottom, you can see another point of light that resembles the other 3 lights. We actually can see evidence of an exhaust trail or contrail, very consistent with an airplane. That leads me to believe that what we're looking at here are likewise also airplanes However, the one that passed in front of the camera where we were able to see the contrail was just closer to the Orion filming it.
In fact, McMillan believes Arrow wanted this footage released to the public, specifically to pour some cold water on the heated topic of UAPs.
These are definitely distant commercial airplanes. Frankly, I think this video was intentionally released to give people an idea of how aircraft could be misinterpreted as UFOs or UAP by the Department of Defense. I absolutely do not believe that the Department of Defense ever thought these were unidentified aerial phenomena.
Our verdict? We're going with planes in the distance. It turns out the team at Arrow also came to that same conclusion. Although we have to admit, it is strange they appear to be flying in unison. But hey, Arrow, next time you've got a video that can't be explained, be sure to come to us. Miracles, by their very nature, are rare, and we generally conceive of them as happening in times gone by. So when we heard reports of a potential miracle right here and right now in the USA, we couldn't help but investigate. April 2023, Gower, Missouri. It's been 4 years since the death of Sister Wilhelmina Lancaster, who founded the Benedictine Sisters of Mary, Queen of the Apostles. To honor her as a founder, the Sisters of the Order decide to transfer her remains inside to the monastery chapel. When they open the wooden casket to reinter her body, they expect skeletal remains. What they find, however, inspires millions. What you're seeing, believe it or not, is the shockingly well-preserved body of Sister Wilhelmina, 4 years after she died. Catholic miracle researcher Michael O'Neill says her story has gone global.
This is a big-time story. This was featured in the New York Times and other places all around the world because we have the case of possibly the very first American in history whose body was said to be incorrupt. Some saints throughout Christian history have exhibited this phenomenon where their body does not decompose.
So what can possibly be behind this remarkable state of preservation?
It's been somewhat of a tradition considered in the Catholic Church that those people whose bodies do not show the signs of decay are actually blessed by God in such a way that their holiness is being indicated from heaven.
Journalist Aaron McCarthy says one of the most legendary examples of incorruptibility is Saint Bernadette. A scientific investigation of her body was performed in the 1920s, more than 4 decades after her death.
She was actually dissected, and the person who dissected her said that her muscles were still firm and supple, and that her liver was also soft and pliant, which is not what you would expect for a corpse that had been in the ground for 46 years.
Yet, there are those who point to the deterioration of Sister Wilhelmina's hands as evidence that this is not a true case of divine intervention. Still, can a miracle be ruled out?
When people talk about incorruptibility, there's this idea that the entire body is in a state of perfect preservation. But traditionally, that's not how it works. Some saints are incorrupt in just one part, their heart or their tongue, for example.
Following her exhumation, Sister Wilhelmina has been put on display, but will she join other incorruptible saints?
The local bishop has suggested that people do not get too close to the body and do not venerate it as they would a saint because further investigation needs to take place.
Even though Sister Wilhelmina's status as a saint is still up in the air, an estimated 25,000 people came to visit her body a month after she was exhumed. What can explain this phenomenon that has people making pilgrimages to rural Missouri? First, O'Neill looks into how Sister Wilhelmina's body was handled after her death.
There are people who say that some embalming or preservatives might have had to have been applied, but the sisters have denied this. And more importantly, all the scientists who have examined it have said there's no artificial preservation at all.
So could this have happened naturally? Dr. Ed Hope claims that there are certain environmental conditions that can lead to a body being preserved for hundreds or even thousands of years. For example, when the 2,000-year-old Tolland man was discovered in Denmark in 1950, they could still make out the individual wrinkles on his face.
The reason he was so well preserved was that he was discovered in a bog, an environment which would have very little oxygen, have a very low temperature, and a very acidic environment. Therefore, this would restrict the growth of bacteria, and bacteria are key in one of the main processes of decomposition.
So could these sorts of conditions explain what's happening in the case of Sister Wilhelmina?
What is strange in this case is her coffin actually had a hole in it, which you'd think the outside environment coming in would encourage bacteria, encourage insects to break down, to increase the decomposition process. But actually, it seems like the opposite has happened. One thing that was fairly unique when the body was exhumed was that mold was found inside the coffin. Now, ordinarily, you'd think that would lead to an increase in the rate of decomposition, but actually, given the fact that clearly hasn't happened, perhaps that of mold has actually slowed the rate of bacterial growth by being competitive for the oxygen and nutrients in the coffin.
So this may just be one of nature's miracles, or to many, one that's divine. Either way, for millions, the symbolism is more important than some official decree.
Whether or not this is formally established by the Catholic Church as an authentic case of incorruptibility, or whether or not she's actually ever declared a saint, we know that so many people came together to experience this incredible event, which some call a miracle.
Our verdict, potential miracle. Why? There's no natural, easy explanation here. Dr. Hope's mole theory is interesting, but not conclusive. And the Catholic Church hasn't made a determination. What we do know, though, is that Sister Wilhelmina's story has brought hope and wonder to people all over the country. Father and son hikes can lead to bonding moments that last forever. But this particular hike led to a terrifying moment that nobody can forget. 1978, Morris Township, Pennsylvania. It's a crisp fall day, and 10-year-old Daniel Adams is hiking through the woods with his father, trying to find the source of strange sounds they've been hearing on their property.
We could hear this thing growling, and my dad told me to stay there, that he was going to walk down and see what this was.
The duo has brought along a tape recorder and managed to capture this chilling audio. We hear a horrible howling made by a dog, followed by a guttural growling made by something else, something unknown. Take another listen as we've isolated these sounds through our audio filter. Although he says the recordings don't do the sounds justice, over 40 years later, Daniel still remembers this frightening encounter vividly.
This roar shook the ground. It was 200 yards away, and I felt it like a bass speaker in your chest. And I know that was no bear. There ain't no bear that can do that.
Shortly after this recording was captured, Daniel says they heard whatever it was fighting with a neighbor's dog, presumably the dog they thought they heard in the recording. And that was the last time the dog was heard from again, a detail some researchers think supports the idea that the mystery creature is a Sasquatch, which they say is no vegan.
Being a Sasquatch, you're an omnivore. Everything's on the menu, man. In fact, I know of one homestead in Wisconsin. They had about 9 or 12 cats, but they noticed the numbers slowly dwindling over a month or two, and that was a Sasquatch predating on the cats. From Fido to Fluffy, everything is a meal if you're a Sasquatch.
And if that's true, then why aren't Sasquatches also going after people?
There are a small number of Sasquatch reports of them going after humans as a food item, but generally they don't want anything to do with us. Any Sasquatch of adult age has probably observed human hunters. They can't like the rifles or the noises that they make.
That kind of makes sense. Studies show other large creatures like bears are normally shy, retiring animals that have very little desire to interact with humans. On the other hand, They compete directly for food with canines like wolves. Could the same be true of Bigfoot? And could that explain what we're hearing on Daniel's recording? We turn to our experts to investigate. Forensic audio analyst Dr. Rob Maher confirmed the recording is authentic, then compared it to a recording of a black bear native to this area.
The bear sounds have much more of a low-frequency quality to them. It's more of a grunt sound that the bear makes. But the low-frequency grunt qualities here is not something that we see in the Pennsylvania recording.
Humans have a vast vocal range. Could this be a person?
Although humans can make sounds that are very similar to perhaps a wolf or a coyote, the characteristics in the Pennsylvania recording don't match up with this type of a sound.
We also asked Maher to compare this to the Sierra Sounds, a famous set of alleged California Sasquatch recordings from the 1970s. How do these match up?
There's an upward sound and then a little bit of a kicker to that sound that goes in there. That is not what we hear in the Pennsylvania sounds. They have more of a shriek or a growl sort of quality than what we would attribute to the Sierra sounds.
Still, Professor of Anatomy and Anthropology, Dr. Jeff Meldrum thinks this recording could be legitimate, since the vocal repertoire attributed to Sasquatch is extensive and varied.
There were a couple of little high-pitch inflections that were more indicative of some kind of a call that is not out of character with some recordings that have been attributed to Sasquatch.
Our verdict? Our experts are calling this an unknown animal sound, but they can't identify what exactly made these grunts in the 1970s. However, we do know Sasquatch sightings in the area continue today. We've explored theories that UFOs are drawn to certain features of human civilization. Nuclear facilities, combat zones, even cultural celebrations like the 4th of July. But some people also think UFOs might be interested in our infrastructure, like the electrical grid, and that this might be the video that proves it. 7:43 on August 16, 2023. It's a clear summer evening, and Gary McHatton is walking his dog outside his home in Nashville, Tennessee. He suddenly spots something out of the ordinary shimmering in the air, so he quickly pulls out his phone to capture this. A mysterious bright object appears to hover between two sets of power lines. Zooming in for a closer look, we see what appears to be an oblong craft with a small point protruding both above and below it, like a division sign. Whatever it is, it's grabbed the attention of writer Amy Title.
What's interesting about this video is whatever this object is, it's hard to tell whether it's white and reflecting light, whether it's metallic, or whether it's illuminated or emitting some kind of glow on its own.
Could it be the power lines drawing in this UFO? The McMinnville photographs, some of the most famous of all time, also showed a saucer-like object flying near a set of power lines near an Oregon farm in 1950. And Title notes other sightings connected to our use of electricity.
Some wonder whether UFOs might be attracted to the electric fields generated by these power lines. And others point to a link between UFOs and electrical power plants.
Case in point, an eerie incident that occurred on the East Coast back in November of 1965.
In New York State, portions of 6 neighboring states and parts of Canada were all plunged into a blackout. Numerous eyewitnesses reported seeing lights in the sky.
One newspaper reported that moments before the blackout, people saw a strange red ball hanging over the Sir Adam Beck power plant in Ontario.
Some wonder whether aliens were responsible for the blackout. There are also reports eyewitnesses saw them going into or leaving the scene.
At the time, it was reported even a University of Arizona physicist believed the 65 blackout could have been caused by UFOs. But is this footage proof of some sort of connection between aliens and electricity? We bring in our experts to illuminate this case. First, we hand the footage to astronomer and visual effects artist Mark D'Antonio.
This does not have to be faked. This looks like, to me, like real footage. I didn't see any evidence of manipulation. Now, the witness is moving around a little bit, but besides that, this is just a straight, short clip.
So what about the notion that this craft might be seeking energy from the power lines? D'Antonio explains while it may look that way, in fact, the proximity is just an optical illusion.
It's moving along at a not too fast speed, but the movement is related to the fact that this thing is moving in the sky, and the wires are just in the way between us and that object. Based on where we see the power lines, this object here could be somewhere around 34 to 36,000 feet.
So if we're looking at something thousands of feet in the air, could it be a drone?
We know that we have drones that can fly this high with capabilities that are really quite astonishing.
But D'Antonio says not so fast.
It might have characteristics of a military drone, but those drones also have a certain body type and body shape and profile. Military drones tend to be slender in the center and have very, very long wings. This image right here, it just seems to be too big to be a military drone in terms of its bulk.
Instead, military aviation expert Tim McMillan believes there are other clues that successfully solve the mystery.
At first glance, it doesn't appear to be a plane, but there's a couple of things that lead me in that direction. The video was filmed within close proximity to the Nashville International Airport. It even helps explain exactly why we see this elongated object and some slight, subtle protrusions.
Those protruding red dots on top and bottom of what looks like a division sign, it's not alien tech. McMillan says they're wings. In fact, he goes one step further.
I think the bright white fuselages and the wings and tail section of the aircraft looks like it's painted red.
For McMillan, the vibrant paint job is the final giveaway that ultimately identifies which flight this is.
Looking at the flight data, we find that there was a commercial aircraft in that area exactly when this video was filmed. It was a Sunwing commercial airliner flying from Cancun to Toronto, which has a color scheme where the wings of the aircraft are red and the tail section is red with a big white fuselage.
Talk about some good sleuthing. Our verdict, this is a regular airplane that gives the illusion of being a strange object near those power lines. I hope you're not shocked. Metal detecting in Australia can really pay off. In late 2022, one man even found a hunk of gold worth 6 figures with one of these things. However, more recently, beachcombers came across another metal object that washed up on shore. It was less shiny than gold, but more intriguing. Take a look. July 16th, 2023, Greenhead, Australia. Police are called to the beach to investigate an unusual object that has washed ashore. When they arrive, what they find is much weirder and larger than anything they ever expected. A huge, gold-colored metallic cylinder sits on the sand. It's about 8 feet wide and nearly 10 feet long. The top looks worn and scratched in a crossed pattern. The bottom portion is smooth, with seaweed and barnacles clinging to it farther down. Journalist MJ Benayes says some folks online believed the object came from out of this world.
There are some people who think that this object is extraterrestrial in nature. And a lot of their beliefs really pertain to the fact that it just does look a little outer spacey.
But as word spread of the mysterious object, another theory surfaced that it could be connected to one of the biggest aviation mysteries of all time, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370.
March 2014, the Beijing-bound flight heads out over the South China Sea, along with its 239 passengers. It was tracked for a couple hours, but then all of a sudden, everyone loses contact with it.
After 4 years, official searches for the flight ended on May 29, 2018.
The mystery of what happened to MH370 is sort of like a modern myth. So one question that arose when this washed up on the beach was, is this object from that downed flight? And does it answer the question of what happened to MH370?
Only some pieces of MH370 have been found. The recovery effort became one of the most expensive in the history of aviation, costing about $150 million US. And in March 2024, it was reported the Malaysian government might renew the search for the missing plane. Could this be a piece of that fateful flight? Or is it some sort of unknown technology altogether? Our experts hop down under for some answers. Military aviation expert Tim McMillan addresses the UFO theory.
There's a lot of little things that would tell me this is not an alien spacecraft. The top of the object appears to have some type of fiberglass composite. That's very consistent with something that's designed to withstand extreme heat. You also see other riveting bolts. All of this is human man-made manufacturing techniques.
So is it from a plane? Could this object have come from the mysterious flight MH370?
It's not outside the realm of possibility that perhaps this could be a component to that missing aircraft. However, MH370 has been lost over 9 years. Any components of that aircraft that have been submerged in the ocean for that length of time, you would expect to see significant corrosion and much more marine growth. I would speculate this is an object that's been submerged in salt water in the ocean for likely a couple of months.
So perhaps it's not MH370, but could it be a different aircraft? McMillan isn't so sure.
It's larger than what I would expect most aircraft parts. And we don't see any windows. I think it's definitely not any type of conventional aircraft.
So it's not a plane, and it's not alien in nature. According to Rich Hoffman from the Scientific Coalition of UAP Studies, that leaves one prime suspect: space junk.
There's striations or lines up here that do crosshatches. That fibrous kind of like texture of that is something you see on the spacecraft. And to me, it looks like a fuel cell from polar satellite launch vehicles.
A polar satellite launch vehicle, or PSLV for short, is a 4-stage rocket used for carrying satellites into orbit. Sure enough, Hoffman did some digging and learned the official story.
In talking with the Indian Space Research Organization, it matches their polar satellite launch vehicles that they send in orbit, and this is actually a fuel cell from one of their launched rockets. This is a case where the actual fuel cell has now come down to the Earth and washed up on the shore.
Our verdict: this is part of an Indian PSLV rocket. And according to records, one such rocket was launched from Sriharikota, India on April 22nd, less than 3 months before the mystery object washed ashore. As for the mystery of MH370, we hope to have a solution to that soon. In the spring of 2023, Prince Charles was crowned king after the 70-year rule of Queen Elizabeth II. Inside Westminster Abbey, where the coronation happened, all eyes were on King Charles. But outside, something else was stealing the spotlight. May 6th, 2023, tens of thousands of well-wishers gather in London to watch the coronation of King Charles III. Photographer Simon Balson is positioned on the 13th floor of his apartment building to photograph the Red Arrows. They're the Royal Air Force's acrobatic team. They're planning a dramatic flyby over Buckingham Palace. As the jets come thundering by, Simon gets his shot. But it's not until later that he realizes he's also captured this. A small object floats above the flight team as they race by in a V formation. Zooming in, writer Aaron McCarthy says we see what appears to be an acorn-shaped object with a bright red top and darker bottom.
This object seems to be hovering over the plains. It doesn't look like any aircraft I've ever seen before. After the photographer noticed this bizarre object in his photographs, this went viral on the internet.
An unidentified flying object crashing King Charles's coronation, it may not be so strange. The royal family, and specifically Charles's father, Philip, have long been interested in UFOs, and the feeling may be mutual.
It's been rumored Prince Philip apparently had a huge interest in UFOs, dating back to a report filed by his uncle, Lord Mountbatten. In the 1950s, workers at the Broadlands estate, which belonged to Lord Louis Mountbatten, reported a flying saucer that seemed to be investigating the property, which was a big concern for the royal family because they spent a lot of time there.
Ever since, it's been noted that Philip became devoted to exploring the possibility of extraterrestrial life.
Prince Philip was said to have a whole library of books devoted to UFOs, and he was also apparently a subscriber to the Flying Saucer Review.
For years, the UK's Ministry of Defense investigated UFOs until the program was axed in 2009 due to budget cuts. But is this really a UFO or something more down to earth? I have my suspicions. Let's ask the experts. First, is the object supposed to be there? Could it be another aerial part of the celebration along with the red arrows? Some have speculated it could be some kind of stealth aircraft. But hang on.
A flying wing aircraft, think the B-2 stealth bomber or the F-117 Nighthawk. But there's nothing that I see from this photo that leads me to believe that there's anything like that. Certainly just from the size and shape, nothing that resembles that.
In fact, McMillan is convinced it's not an airplane at all.
If you look closely, there's no wings, there's no propellers, there's not a fuselage, there's not a tail section. There's absolutely no characteristics that resemble an airplane. I think you can kind of interpret based on the photograph. The size of it is pretty small, much smaller than the jets. If I had to speculate, 2-3 feet in diameter, something of that nature. So this is not a large object.
A 2 to 3 foot long object that flies? Sounds like it could be a drone to us. And we have seen drones that don't look like your average quadcopter. Could we be looking at one now? Let's take that question to astronomer and video effects designer Mark D'Antonio.
I don't think so. I don't know any drones that are shaped like that. We would actually see the structure of the drone, and we don't see that here.
This was photographed over the coronation of King Charles, so this is an area that's going to have restricted airspace anyway because of potential terrorist attacks or any kind of national security threat to the royal family. So you wouldn't have any other aircraft flying in that area. All we have here to go on is the photograph. Perhaps if we had a video and we saw this object darting around erratically or suddenly speed off at a great speed, that might cause me to pause and ask some questions. But from just the photo, I don't see anything that's really otherworldly.
If this was a UFO, do you think the organizers of this air show would allow or even be unaware that something like this was flying into their airspace? Absolutely not.
Ultimately, D'Antonio believes we're looking at something much more down to earth.
Now that shape looks like a heart, doesn't it? And at the end here, you see there's like a little thing on the end here. Now this is a coronation. If you go to a coronation, you can imagine that there's probably street vendors that sell things like Mylar balloons.
And note the way the light hits the object's surface.
Even the kind of shimmery reflectiveness that we see here, I think it's a Mylar balloon that's probably gotten away from one of the spectators or attendees who's there to enjoy all the events for the coronation.
You can capture an ordinary object in an extraordinary way, and that's just what happened here.
The forest loomed like an ancient cathedral, every tree a column stretching toward the gray canopy above, filtering the pale winter light in muted shots across the leaf-strewn ground. For decades, the Pacific Northwest had been the epicenter of whispers and legends, rumors that refused to die despite skepticism, dismissals, and the relentless march of science. Among the local townsfolk, the stories persisted in hushed tones, told around campfires and in bars over the warmth of whiskey, as if the cold reality outside could not penetrate the veil of mystery surrounding the wilderness. James Caldwell, a seasoned wildlife photographer and cryptid enthusiast, had spent years chasing these stories, often returning empty-handed but never without a sense of purpose. His obsession was not just curiosity, it was a compulsion, a conviction that something extraordinary roamed the forest just beyond the reach of the casual hiker. Today, however, the stakes felt different. The wind carried a subtle tension, the salt that prickled the skin even beneath layers of flannel and down. He adjusted the straps of his camera harness and checked the settings on his high-resolution DSLR, knowing that every second in the field could mean the difference between capturing history and walking away with another anecdote. Beside him, Sarah Mitchell, an investigative journalist with a reputation for skepticism bordering on cynicism, scanned the terrain with a mixture of amusement and wariness. Her assignment was clear: document Caldwell's latest expedition for the upcoming feature in a major national magazine. She did not believe in Bigfoot, not really, but she had learned long ago that belief and evidence often dance along parallel lines, sometimes crossing in unexpected ways. "You really think we'll find him today?" she asked, her voice low, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the spirits of the forest. Caldwell smirked, not out of doubt in her question but out of confidence in his own intuition. "It's never about thinking," he replied. "It's about being ready. Being in the right place, at the right time, with your senses sharp. The forest talks if you listen." They moved silently along a narrow trail, the snow underfoot crunching softly, each step measured and deliberate. The trees grew denser as they advanced, their trunks wrapped in moss and lichen, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Birds occasionally broke the quiet, their calls echoing like echoes of a distant choir, but otherwise, the forest seemed suspended in a timeless hush. Caldwell's eyes scanned the shadows, reading them like a map of hidden pathways, noting the fallen logs that might conceal animal tracks, listening for the subtle snap of a branch that could betray movement. Sarah, notebook in hand, scribbled observations with a practiced eye, though she found herself increasingly absorbed by the environment itself, the way the light shifted, the way the air seemed to pulse with something intangible. Hours passed without incident, the kind of slow, methodical wandering that trained hunters and naturalists often describe as the heartbeat of the forest. And then, without warning, something changed. A low, resonant sound, not quite a growl, not quite a howl, reverberated through the trees. Both of them froze. Caldwell's pulse quickened, his breath coming in controlled, shallow draws. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Sarah nodded, her skepticism momentarily suspended by the unmistakable vibration in the air. The sound came again, longer this time, a haunting call that seemed to emerge from deep within the forest, echoing and fading in irregular intervals. Caldwell's eyes sparkled with the thrill of possibility. "That's him," he said softly, almost reverently. He motioned for Sarah to stay close, moving with deliberate stealth toward the source of the sound. The trail narrowed, hemmed in by towering evergreens, their branches heavy with snow. The underbrush became tangled, forcing them to navigate carefully to avoid snapping twigs underfoot. As they progressed, the forest seemed to react, branches swaying despite the absence of wind, the distant call repeating in irregular cadence, sometimes close, sometimes impossibly far. Caldwell stopped suddenly, raising a hand. He crouched, scanning the area with binoculars, and then pointed. "Tracks," he whispered. Large, deep impressions in the snow, 5 toes clearly visible, heel and arch pronounced, unlike any bear or known mammal. Sarah leaned in, examining the prints, a thrill mingling with disbelief. She snapped photos, her journalist's instinct kicking in despite the chill that ran down her spine. "This is unreal," she murmured. Caldwell smiled faintly. "It's real. And we're close." They followed the tracks cautiously, careful not to disturb them or leave their own marks in the snow. The tracks wound through the forest, occasionally disappearing under a patch of dense undergrowth or snow-covered boulders, reappearing just when hope seemed dim. Hours of trekking brought them to a small clearing, sunlight breaking through in shafts that illuminated a thick layer of snow. The temperature seemed to drop here, an almost tangible pressure in the air. Caldwell motioned for silence, signaling Sarah to stop. He moved forward a few steps, pausing to scan the perimeter, every muscle taut with anticipation. Then he saw it, a figure at the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by trees, massive and humanoid, yet covered in coarse, dark fur. It was taller than any man, its movements deliberate, fluid, and undeniably intelligent. The creature turned its head, locking eyes with Caldwell for a brief, electric moment that made his heart race. Time seemed suspended. Caldwell lifted his camera, breath-catching as he framed the shot, every instinct screaming both fear and awe. The shutter clicked, each press echoing in the stillness like a punctuation mark in an otherwise wordless scene. The creature let out another low, resonant call, the sound vibrating through the air, before slowly retreating into the dense forest, leaving behind only the disturbance in the snow and the echoes of its presence. Caldwell lowered the camera, shaking slightly, his mind racing. Sarah approached cautiously, eyes wide. "Did we just," she began, but words failed her, overtaken by the enormity of what they had witnessed. They moved into the clearing, examining the snow where the figure had stood, documenting every detail with photographs, notes, and sketches. The tracks were immense, the impressions deep, evidence of a weight and gait impossible to ignore. Caldwell's excitement was palpable, a mixture of triumph and the sobering realization that their lives had just intersected with a legend. "We need to be methodical now," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "This isn't about chasing myths anymore. We have proof, but it's fragile. We have to record it, preserve it, and most importantly, respect it." They set up cameras at strategic points around the clearing, motion-activated and silent, hoping to capture another glimpse without disturbing the creature further. Caldwell reviewed each shot meticulously, adjusting angles, sensitivity, and placement, while Sarah continued her documentation, alternating between skepticism and awe as she processed the reality in front of her. Hours stretched into dusk, the forest slowly darkening, the temperature dropping further as night settled over the trees. Sounds of nocturnal creatures began to emerge, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small mammals, but nothing approached the size or resonance of the figure they had witnessed. Caldwell and Sarah huddled together, sharing a thermos of hot coffee, exchanging observations and cautious theories. "We've only seen it once," Sarah said finally, breaking the silence. "How do we know it's not a bear? Not an elaborate prank?" "Trust me," Caldwell interrupted gently. "The tracks, the movement, the call is something else entirely. Something unknown. Something that deserves our respect and our patience." They spent the remainder of the night reviewing their footage, enhancing images, and taking meticulous notes, fully aware that these moments would define the trajectory of their work. Neither spoke of fear, it was replaced by a profound sense of purpose. The forest around them was no longer just trees and snow, it was a living testament to the mysteries that had persisted beyond human understanding, a reminder that even in a world dominated by science and reason, wonder still existed. When dawn finally broke, casting a silver glow across the treetops, Caldwell and Sarah stood together in the clearing, exhausted but exhilarated. Tracks led deeper into the forest, vanishing into the unknown, a silent invitation to continue the search. Caldwell glanced at Sarah, a wry smile on his face. "This is just the beginning. The first real proof, the first step into something much larger. Are you ready for what comes next?" Sarah nodded, a mixture of apprehension and excitement in her eyes. "I think I am," she said. Together, they began retracing their path, careful not to disturb the evidence, fully aware that the forest had changed them, had revealed a fragment of its ancient secrets, and that the story they were about to tell would challenge the very boundaries of belief and reality. The first Bigfoot photograph existed now, captured in crystal clarity, a testament not only to the creature's existence but to the persistence, patience, and passion of those who dared to seek it. And somewhere in the dense, silent forest, the unknown watched, unperturbed, as if acknowledging that humanity had glimpsed only the edge of a story far greater than any one expedition could capture. The forest seemed alive with its own rhythm as Caldwell and Sarah pressed further into the wilderness, the tracks they had discovered the previous day guiding them deeper into territories few humans had traversed. The morning air was crisp and carried the faint scent of pine resin, mixed with the earthy undertones of melting snow. Caldwell adjusted his gear meticulously, his camera bag snug against his shoulders, lenses and batteries packed with precision, as if every detail mattered more than it ever had before. Sarah followed, notebook ready, the journalistic instinct in her awakening to a reality she had never truly believed in, her earlier skepticism gradually giving way to a mixture of awe and professional curiosity. Each step was cautious. The snow, now slightly firmer underfoot, revealed subtle signs of movement, broken branches, displaced leaves, and faint impressions that could only belong to something unusually large. Caldwell paused frequently, scanning the surroundings, his binoculars sweeping from the undergrowth to the tree line, reading the forest as though it were a living manuscript, each sound, scent, and shadow part of a narrative he was desperate to decipher. "It's remarkable how aware they are," he said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper, as if fearing the forest itself might overhear. "Bigfoot isn't just a creature, it's an ecosystem unto itself, and it knows we're here. Every movement, every sound we make is being observed." Sarah scribbled notes furiously, aware that her words might never capture the essence of what they were experiencing. The forest, with its dense undergrowth and ancient trees, seemed to close around them, narrowing the path, funneling them forward, almost as if guiding them toward a destination they could not yet comprehend. They approached a series of rock formations, moss-covered and slick with melting snow, the terrain becoming increasingly treacherous. Caldwell's experience in wilderness navigation proved invaluable. He led with confidence, pointing out footholds, loose stones, and natural markers that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. Then came a sound, a low, guttural exhalation, distinct from the wind and distant wildlife. Both froze. The hairs on their arms stood on end. The sound repeated, deeper this time, resonating through the valley like a warning or an announcement. Caldwell signaled Sarah to stay still, raising his hand slowly. He moved forward a few steps, scanning the rocky terrain with his binoculars, noting the subtle movements in the shadows. And then he saw it, a massive shape, partially concealed by a fallen tree, moving with deliberate care, glancing briefly in their direction before disappearing behind the rocky outcrop. Caldwell's heart pounded. "It's close," he whispered. "Closer than before." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she raised her camera, capturing the fleeting image, each click of the shutter echoing faintly in the silent expanse. The creature had left tracks that were unmistakable, enormous, five-toed impressions with a depth suggesting significant weight. Caldwell knelt beside the fresh prints, studying them carefully, measuring stride length and depth, taking detailed photographs. "This gait is deliberate. The stride is long, purposeful. This isn't random wandering, it's intelligent movement, calculated and aware of our presence." Sarah leaned closer, her breath visible in the cold air, a mixture of excitement and fear evident in her eyes. "It's almost humanoid," she murmured. "And yet, something entirely different. Something wild." They followed the tracks cautiously, the terrain becoming steeper, the trees sparser, revealing a valley shrouded in mist. The air was damp, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine, and the forest seemed quieter, as if holding its breath. Then, a sound unlike anything they had heard before, a long, mournful howl that reverberated through the valley, echoing off the distant ridges. Caldwell froze, his eyes wide. "That's the call," he whispered. "It's communicating." Sarah's journalistic instincts fled. She quickly began recording audio with a high-sensitivity microphone, knowing this could be as significant as the photographs. The howl repeated, varied in pitch and cadence, sending a shiver down their spines. Caldwell gestured toward the source, indicating a narrow, winding path that led deeper into the valley. "We have to move slowly," he cautioned. "Every sound we make, every misstep, could change what happens next. This is territory where patience and respect are as important as courage." They proceeded with utmost care, slipping over wet stones and carefully avoiding loose branches that might betray their presence. Every few minutes, Caldwell would pause, scanning the valley floor and tree lines with binoculars, analyzing the slightest movements, listening intently for any new sounds. Sarah documented everything meticulously, capturing photographs, audio, and detailed notes. Hours passed, and the sun began to dip, casting long shadows that danced across the valley in eerie patterns. The forest took on a golden hue, and the mist thickened, wrapping around them like a living shroud. And then, a breakthrough, they stumbled upon a series of markings carved into the bark of an enormous cedar tree. Not random scratches, but deliberate, vertical grooves, deep and precise. Caldwell knelt, examining them closely. "These are territorial markings," he said, tracing the grooves with gloved fingers. "Signaling to others, establishing presence. This is social behavior, complex and deliberate." Sarah photographed the markings extensively, her previous skepticism nearly dissolved by the tangible evidence. The clearing nearby contained more surprises, a circle of flattened brush and moss, as though someone, or something, had deliberately arranged it, creating a temporary resting spot. Caldwell stepped closer, his boots crunching lightly on the snow. "It's a nest," he whispered. "Temporary, but clearly used." The implications were staggering. The creature was not a solitary, wandering myth, it had patterns, habits, territory, and intelligence. Sarah's voice trembled slightly as she recorded her observations. "This is monumental," she said. "We are witnessing the behavior of a species that has eluded science for centuries. This is living history." Caldwell nodded, eyes scanning the perimeter. "And it's not just history. It's proof. Proof that we've underestimated the natural world, proof that myths often have roots in reality." They continued their careful exploration, the valley revealing more signs, broken branches at heights only a massive creature could reach, large scat indicating a diet of both plants and small mammals, and fur caught on jagged rocks, coarse and dark. Each discovery reinforced what they had already suspected: the creature was real, intelligent, and thriving in this environment. As evening approached, the valley became colder, shadows lengthening, and Caldwell decided it was time to set up camp. They found a sheltered alcove beneath an overhanging rock formation, a natural windbreak, and quickly pitched a small, insulated tent. Caldwell checked all equipment, ensuring cameras and audio devices were strategically placed to capture any nocturnal activity. Sarah, meanwhile, huddled with a thermos of coffee, documenting every observation, sketching the tracks and markings, and noting the sequence of sounds and movements they had witnessed. The night was restless, each snap of a branch, each rustle in the underbrush, sending adrenaline coursing through their veins. At one point, a series of low vocalizations echoed through the valley, close, deliberate, and unmistakably sentient. Caldwell and Sarah froze, listening intently as the sounds shifted in tone and pitch, almost conversational in cadence. Caldwell whispered. It's communicating. With whom? I don't know, but it's aware of us. The hours stretched, filled with anticipation and tension, neither daring to move. Unnecessarily, both acutely aware that they were visitors in a world that did not belong to humans. Just before dawn, a massive silhouette emerged from the mist at the edge of the clearing, towering and imposing, yet moving with surprising grace. Caldwell raised his camera, capturing multiple shots as the creature paused briefly, its eyes reflecting a strange intelligence, an awareness of the observers before it slowly retreated into the dense forest. The valley was silent again, but the evidence remained: tracks, markings, the disturbed nest, and photographs that captured a fleeting but undeniable reality. Caldwell and Sarah exchanged glances, a mixture of exhaustion, exhilaration, and profound reverence passing between them. We have enough for the world to pay attention now, Caldwell said quietly, voice thick with emotion. Sarah nodded, her skepticism now fully replaced with understanding and awe. But the story isn't just about proof, she replied. It's about what this creature teaches us: patience, respect, and the limits of our understanding. As they packed up camp, carefully collecting all devices and minimizing traces of their presence, both understood that this expedition had changed them irrevocably. The forest had offered them a glimpse into a hidden world, a reality that defied conventional knowledge and yet was undeniably present, palpable, and alive. They moved out of the valley, following the tracks back toward more familiar terrain, but a sense of wonder lingered. Each step forward was weighted with the knowledge that the forest still held secrets, that the creature they had glimpsed continued to observe, to exist, and to thrive beyond the reach of human interference. By the time they emerged onto a wider trail, the first rays of sunlight illuminated the treetops, and the world outside the forest seemed unchanged, unaware of the monumental discovery that had taken place within the valley. Caldwell and Sarah paused, looking back at the dense wilderness, understanding that their journey was far from over. This was not a singular event but the beginning of a deeper exploration, a continuing story of observation, respect, and revelation. The photographs, recordings, and detailed notes they carried were only the start. The true understanding of the creature, its habits, and its society remained elusive, a puzzle stretching beyond the edges of human perception. But for the first time, both felt the undeniable truth: Bigfoot was no longer myth. It was real, it was intelligent, and it was out there, waiting, watching, and communicating in ways humans were only beginning to comprehend. The days that followed were a delicate balance of preparation and anticipation, a mixture of strategy, intuition, and meticulous documentation. Caldwell and Sarah returned to their temporary base in the small town bordering the forest, a place where the scent of pine still lingered in the cool air, mingling with the faint aroma of coffee brewing in local diners. They spent hours reviewing the photographs and audio recordings, enhancing images, isolating sounds, and cross-referencing tracks with known wildlife to eliminate any possibility of misidentification. Every detail was scrutinized: the depth and spacing of footprints, the texture of fur caught on branches, the pattern of the creature's vocalizations. Sarah, usually precise and objective in her reporting, found herself caught between professional skepticism and personal wonder, struggling to reconcile the evidence before her eyes with the understanding that she had once dismissed as improbable. These markings, Caldwell said one afternoon, pointing to a series of vertical grooves in a high-resolution photograph, they're not random. There's intelligence in the pattern, a kind of language, or at least a method of communication. Whoever, or whatever, is making them knows what it's doing. Sarah leaned closer, her breath fogging the cold glass of the screen. It almost feels like a warning, she said. Or a message. Caldwell nodded, his eyes scanning the images repeatedly. Yes. But warnings imply awareness, awareness implies consciousness. And if consciousness exists here, it means we are dealing with an entity far more sophisticated than any folklore ever suggested. Despite the excitement, Caldwell insisted on methodical planning for their return to the forest. He plotted routes that minimized disturbance, mapped areas of prior sightings, and reviewed wildlife patterns, considering everything from seasonal movements to the likelihood of other human presence. Sarah meticulously documented these plans, her notes growing into a detailed dossier that could serve as both scientific record and journalistic narrative. When the next expedition began, the air was crisp and electric, charged with the promise of discovery. Caldwell led the way, every step deliberate, every sound measured. Sarah followed, camera ready, notebook in hand, aware that the forest now felt like a living entity, responsive to their presence. They returned to the clearing where the first sighting had occurred, the snow now slightly crusted with ice, preserving every footprint and disturbance in crystalline detail. Caldwell moved carefully, examining the tracks, noting changes in depth and direction, attempting to deduce the creature's recent activity. "It hasn't wandered far," he whispered. "Whatever we saw yesterday is still within this area. These tracks indicate movement, not flight, movement with purpose, intent." Sarah's attention was drawn to the subtle disturbances in the underbrush, slight bends in branches, impressions that could only belong to something of extraordinary size. "It's almost like it knows we're coming," she said. Caldwell nodded. "It's intelligent enough to be cautious. And cautious enough to teach us patience." Hours passed with careful observation. They documented every new mark, analyzed fur samples, and captured sequences of images using motion-sensitive cameras strategically placed around the clearing. By mid-afternoon, the sun's rays had begun to slant, illuminating the mist that hung in pockets between trees. Caldwell froze suddenly, raising a hand. Sarah followed his gaze. There, moving silently along a ridge above them, was a massive figure, partially concealed by the trees, its dark fur blending seamlessly with the shadows. The creature paused, lifting its head as if assessing the intruders below. Its eyes glimmered with a peculiar awareness, an intelligence that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Caldwell raised his camera with precision, capturing multiple shots in rapid succession, every click echoing softly in the quiet of the forest. The creature let out a low, resonant call, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. Sarah instinctively activated the audio recorder, her hands trembling slightly. The call repeated, a sequence of tones and inflections that suggested deliberation rather than random noise. "It's communicating," Caldwell whispered, all coloring his tone. "And we're listening." The figure lingered for several minutes, each movement deliberate and cautious. Then, without warning, it descended into the denser forest, leaving only footprints and the fading echo of its call. Caldwell and Sarah exchanged a glance, unspoken words passing between them. They had witnessed not just a creature but a being, one that possessed awareness, intelligence, and a presence that defied the ordinary. They spent the rest of the day following tracks and documenting signs, careful to avoid disturbing the area. Every observation reinforced a growing realization: they were dealing with an entity with habits, knowledge of its environment, and a sophisticated understanding of human behavior. As twilight approached, the forest began to hum with nocturnal life. The sounds of smaller creatures filled the air, but Caldwell and Sarah remained focused, listening for any indication of the larger presence they sought. Just as darkness began to settle, a new sound emerged, a series of soft, rhythmic knocks, not random but deliberate, echoing from somewhere deep within the trees. Caldwell paused, listening intently. "It's a signal," he said quietly. "A form of communication we don't yet understand, but clearly intended for recognition or response." Sarah jotted down every detail, noting intervals, intensity, and resonance. They positioned themselves near the source, cameras and audio devices ready, their breath visible in the cold evening air. Minutes stretched into an hour, and then, a movement, a massive shape emerged from the shadows, its posture upright, its head moving in deliberate sweeps, scanning the area. Caldwell raised the camera and held his breath as the creature paused, its eyes locking briefly with his, a silent acknowledgement of their presence. The creature made a low, resonant sound, one that seemed to blend curiosity with caution, and then vanished again into the forest. The significance of the encounter was undeniable. Caldwell lowered the camera, exhaling slowly. "We are witnessing intelligence," he said. "Not instinct alone, but awareness, calculation, and perhaps even curiosity. This changes everything." Sarah's voice was hushed but filled with excitement. "It's like looking at a living mystery. One that has existed alongside us, unseen, yet fully aware of the world around it." The night grew colder, and Caldwell insisted on setting up a temporary observation point rather than attempting further pursuit. They erected a camouflage tent near the clearing, arranging motion-sensitive cameras and strategically placing audio recorders to maximize the chance of capturing activity. They settled in, coffee in hand, the forest alive with nocturnal sounds, the rhythmic heartbeat of the wilderness both calming and exhilarating. Hours passed in tense anticipation. Every rustle, every snap of a branch, set their nerves alight with possibility. At one point, Caldwell thought he saw movement near a cluster of trees, a dark shape larger than any deer, moving with deliberate grace. The creature remained elusive, emerging just long enough to leave impressions in the snow, tufts of fur, and subtle disturbances in the undergrowth. By dawn, their camp was surrounded with evidence, fresh footprints, displaced vegetation, and traces that suggested the creature had been observing them throughout the night, yet deliberately avoiding direct contact. Caldwell and Sarah cataloged everything, ensuring photographs, video, and audio recordings were carefully preserved. "This is more than proof of existence," Caldwell said quietly. "It's proof of behavior, intelligence, and perhaps even culture. This creature is more complex than anyone has imagined." Sarah, still processing the gravity of their observations, added, "And we're just scratching the surface. There's a world here that science has ignored, a species operating outside our understanding, and we're privileged to witness it." The return journey to the town was somber and reflective. Both understood that the forest had given them a glimpse of a reality that would challenge conventional knowledge, and that their work would demand patience, integrity, and respect. Caldwell reviewed each photograph meticulously during the ride, enhancing details, noting inconsistencies, and marking locations of particular interest. Sarah compiled her notes, ensuring that every sound, sighting, and trace was recorded with precision. By the time they reached civilization, the sun had risen fully, casting warm light over the town, yet neither could shake the feeling that the forest remained a living entity, watching and waiting, its secrets intact but no longer entirely hidden. Plans for the next expedition were already forming, discussions of strategic placement, observation techniques, and methods to understand communication patterns. Caldwell emphasized minimal intrusion, careful observation, and utmost respect, while Sarah considered how to present the findings to a world that might not yet be ready for them. Over the next few days, they reviewed all collected materials, enhanced images, analyzed audio for patterns, and cross-referenced all observations with known wildlife behaviors. Every detail strengthened their conviction that they had encountered an intelligent, elusive species, one that had survived centuries, adapting silently alongside human activity, yet remaining fundamentally unknowable. By the end of the week, Caldwell and Sarah prepared for their next venture, fully aware that the forest held layers of mystery they had yet to uncover. They understood that the first photograph, the first tracks, the first howl, were only the beginning, that each observation was a doorway to a deeper understanding, and that the forest itself demanded patience, humility, and reverence. As they packed their gear once more, a quiet resolve settled over them. They were no longer mere observers, they had become participants in a story far larger than themselves, a story of existence, intelligence, and survival that had eluded humanity for generations. The forest remained, silent, alive, and vigilant, and somewhere within it, the creature continued to watch, aware, intelligent, and waiting. The return to the forest felt different this time, as though the trees themselves acknowledged Caldwell and Sarah's presence, their towering trunks and thick underbrush forming a cathedral of green shadows that seemed to breathe around them. Every step carried the weight of expectation, a sense that the forest had grown impatient with human curiosity yet willing to allow them glimpses into its hidden depths. Caldwell led the way, boots crunching softly on the frost-covered leaves, his eyes scanning the ground for the faintest disturbance, every movement deliberate, every gesture measured. Sarah followed, notebook and camera at the ready, feeling a mixture of trepidation and exhilaration. The tracks from their previous excursions guided them deeper than they had ever ventured, weaving through narrow corridors of trees and across frozen streams, the forest growing more tangled and foreboding with each passing mile. The sun was low, casting long, skeletal shadows across the forest floor, illuminating patches of snow that gleamed like silver in the waning light. Suddenly, Caldwell stopped, lifting a gloved hand to signal silence. Sarah froze, her breath catching in the cold air. Ahead, partially obscured by a fallen log and a cluster of young evergreens, a series of tracks emerged, fresh, deep, and unmistakably human-like in shape, yet impossibly large. Caldwell knelt to examine them, tracing the impressions with his gloved fingers. "It's moving closer," he whispered. "We are tracking the same individual from the previous expedition. These are fresh." The creature is aware, watching, but not threatened. Yet. The words hung in the air, charged with tension and possibility. They followed the trail with caution, moving slowly to avoid leaving their own marks, careful not to disturb the forest more than necessary. Each step revealed subtle signs of passage, bent branches, displaced moss, small depressions in the snow where the creature had paused, each telling a story of intelligence and awareness. The wind shifted slightly, carrying a sound that made both stop mid-step, a low, almost guttural exhalation, distant yet unmistakably alive. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Caldwell raised his camera and peered through the lens, scanning the shadows for movement. "There," he whispered, pointing. A massive figure emerged, partially concealed by the terrain, its silhouette unmistakable, muscular and covered in coarse, dark fur. It moved with deliberate caution, pausing occasionally to lift its head, as if assessing the intruders below. Sarah raised her camera, capturing rapid-fire shots as Caldwell focused on tracking movement, aware that this moment could define the course of their work. The creature's eyes met Caldwell's briefly, a spark of awareness that sent an electric thrill through him. Then, without warning, it let out a resonant, elongated call, a sound that vibrated through the valley like a living instrument. Sarah activated her audio recorder, hands trembling with adrenaline. The call repeated, changing pitch and cadence, almost conversational, intelligent in its composition. "It's speaking," Caldwell breathed. "Not words, but intent. Recognition, curiosity, maybe even warning." They observed silently, documenting every detail, aware that any abrupt movement could end the encounter prematurely. The figure moved closer, stopping near a stand of trees where Caldwell and Sarah had placed motion-sensitive cameras. The creature's gaze swept the area, observing the cameras, tilting its head as if acknowledging the devices. Then, it crouched slightly, reaching out with a massive hand to touch the snow, tracing a pattern in the frost, before retreating into the shadows. Caldwell and Sarah approached cautiously, documenting the traces. The patterns were deliberate, geometric in form, suggesting cognitive abilities beyond simple instinct. This is symbolic, Caldwell whispered. It's communicating, creating patterns that might be meaningful to its own kind. Or to us, if we can interpret them. Sarah photographed the etchings, recording observations in meticulous detail. Her previous skepticism had entirely dissolved, the evidence was overwhelming. They spent hours following tracks and observing signs, noting the creature's patterns of movement, its apparent awareness of their presence, and its cautious engagement with the environment. By late afternoon, they reached a small clearing where the creature had evidently rested. The ground was flattened in a circular pattern, interspersed with small indentations and what appeared to be rudimentary tools or manipulated branches. Caldwell knelt, examining each element. "We are witnessing behavior that indicates planning, adaptation, and problem-solving," he said. "This is far beyond the realm of myth, this is advanced cognition." Sarah photographed and sketched the scene, aware that every detail was critical. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, the forest darkened, shadows elongating and twisting with an almost supernatural fluidity. Caldwell insisted on setting up a temporary observation point, careful to maintain distance, while Sarah arranged audio recorders and cameras strategically around the clearing. The night was alive with subtle sounds, the rustle of small mammals, the distant call of owls, and occasional snaps of twigs. Amid these ordinary forest noises, there were deeper, more resonant sounds, a low, steady exhalation, almost rhythmic, that hinted at deliberate movement. Hours passed with tense anticipation. Caldwell and Sarah remained still, recording, observing, and occasionally exchanging whispers of insight. Then, a massive shadow emerged at the periphery of their vision, moving silently yet with purpose. The creature paused, crouched slightly, and seemed to inspect the recording devices, its gaze lingering on Caldwell and Sarah for a moment that felt like an eternity. It emitted a series of low tones, rhythmic and deliberate, before disappearing again into the dense forest. Caldwell and Sarah exhaled slowly, hearts pounding. "It's aware of us," Caldwell murmured. "Aware and testing boundaries." Sarah's notebook filled with hurried observations, patterns, behaviors, vocalizations, subtle interactions with the environment. They spent the remainder of the night documenting, adjusting equipment, and analyzing every signal captured. By dawn, the forest was silent but rich with evidence, fresh tracks, rearranged branches, flattened areas, and tufts of dark fur caught in jagged bark. Caldwell and Sarah catalogued everything, understanding the significance of each detail. "Every movement tells a story," Caldwell said. "Every call, every trace, is part of a narrative we are only beginning to understand." Sarah nodded, exhausted but exhilarated. "It's a species with culture, with knowledge. Something the world has ignored for centuries." Their trek back to town was contemplative. Both understood that their work had shifted from mere documentation to interpretation, that they were now part of a complex narrative of existence, awareness, and survival. Plans for future expeditions were discussed, careful observation of behavioral patterns, non-intrusive interaction, and detailed recording of vocalizations and tracks. Caldwell emphasized respect and patience. Sarah focused on the ethical responsibility of documenting evidence without exploitation. Over the next few days, they reviewed all materials, enhancing photographs, isolating audio sequences, and cross-referencing tracks and markings with prior research. Every detail reinforced the reality of their encounters, an intelligent, elusive species thriving alongside humans, observing, adapting, and persisting beyond our comprehension. By the end of the week, both were ready to return to the forest, armed with enhanced equipment, refined strategies, and a profound respect for the intelligence that had revealed itself. The previous encounters had transformed them, instilling a quiet reverence and the recognition that they were witnessing history in real time. They knew that the forest's secrets were layered, that each observation revealed only a fraction of the reality existing beyond human perception. As they packed their gear for the next expedition, a sense of solemn excitement hung over them. They were no longer mere observers, they had become participants in a living mystery, entrusted with glimpses into a world that had persisted undisturbed for centuries. Caldwell looked at Sarah, a quiet determination in his eyes. "The proof is out there," he said softly. "And it's waiting for those patient enough to seek it without fear or interference." Sarah nodded, her voice firm yet reverent. "Then we continue, cautiously, respectfully, and ready to witness whatever comes next." With that, they stepped into the forest once more, each footfall deliberate, each breath conscious, entering a world alive with secrets, intelligence, and the untamed beauty of the unknown. The shadows around them seemed to shift subtly, as if acknowledging their presence, and somewhere in the dense trees, the creature watched, aware, intelligent, and wholly untouchable, a living enigma whose story had only just begun to unfold. The forest at dawn was draped in a silver mist, the rising sun filtering through the towering evergreens, casting elongated shadows across the frost-kissed ground. Caldwell and Sarah moved carefully, their breath forming small clouds that mingled with the morning fog. The previous encounters had left them exhilarated, yet cautious. The forest no longer felt like a passive backdrop but a living participant in their expedition. Every rustle, every creak of a branch, every subtle shift in light seemed charged with significance. They followed the trail of fresh tracks they had discovered the day before, moving deliberately to avoid contamination, each footstep measured, each pause purposeful. Caldwell knelt to examine an indentation in the snow, noting the depth and width with meticulous care. "This stride is deliberate," he murmured, brushing snow away to reveal the full print. "This isn't wandering. There's intent here, pattern, strategy. Whoever, or whatever, is leaving these marks is not random, it's aware, calculating, moving with purpose." Sarah photographed the tracks extensively, her hands steady despite the rising tension. She had spent countless hours observing wildlife in her career, but nothing had prepared her for the scale, precision, and intelligence evident in these impressions. "It's like it knows we're tracking it," she whispered, her voice tinged with awe. "Every move is considered." Caldwell nodded, scanning the surrounding forest with binoculars, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "It's aware, but cautious. Smart enough to test boundaries without revealing everything. That's what makes this so extraordinary." As they proceeded, the trail led them to a small creek, its surface partially frozen, water trickling beneath the thin ice. The tracks approached cautiously, avoiding the most exposed areas, demonstrating an instinctual understanding of terrain and risk. Caldwell knelt again, examining the soil and debris at the water's edge. Small tufts of dark fur clung to branches and rocks. "Each piece of evidence is a puzzle," he said, carefully collecting samples. "Fur, footprints, vocalizations, together, they form a narrative of existence, of intelligence, and of survival." Sarah recorded everything, her professional skepticism now fully replaced by reverent fascination. The creek led them into a densely wooded ravine, a natural corridor that funneled movement through a narrow space. The forest here was thicker, shadows deeper, the air heavier with moisture and the scent of pine and decaying leaves. Caldwell signaled for silence, raising a hand, and they halted mid-step. From somewhere deeper in the trees came a low, rhythmic series of calls, alternating in pitch and tone. Sarah's eyes widened as she activated her audio recorder, capturing the sounds in high fidelity. "It's a pattern," Caldwell whispered. deliberate, communicative, possibly even a form of syntax. They are aware of us but speaking in their own language. The calls repeated intermittently, some shorter, some elongated, each carrying a resonant timbre that vibrated through the cold morning air. Caldwell raised his camera, scanning the shadows, and then froze. A massive figure emerged at the edge of their vision, partially concealed by trees. Its posture was upright, muscular, and deliberate, its fur blending seamlessly with the dappled shadows. It paused, scanning their direction, eyes glinting with awareness and intelligence. Caldwell's heart raced as he captured multiple shots, each shutter click a bridge between legend and reality. The creature let out another low, resonant call, then disappeared momentarily behind a cluster of trees, only to reappear at the clearing ahead. The patterns were methodical, almost ritualistic, suggesting a form of intelligence that extended beyond instinct. Caldwell and Sarah moved cautiously, maintaining observation while avoiding disturbance. The clearing revealed new signs, flattened vegetation arranged in circular patterns, broken branches, positioned as if deliberately placed, and scattered tufts of dark fur that appeared intentionally left. Caldwell knelt, examining each element. "This is intentional," he whispered. "They are marking territory, communicating presence, possibly leaving messages or signals for others of their kind. This is cultural behavior, complex and deliberate." Sarah photographed and sketched every detail, her mind racing to process the significance. Each observation reinforced the reality of a sentient, intelligent species, capable of planning, communication, and awareness of human observers. Hours passed as they documented, recorded, and analyzed the scene. The sun dipped lower, the shadows lengthening, the forest thickening with evening mist. Caldwell suggested a temporary observation point, carefully camouflaged to avoid detection, while Sarah positioned cameras and audio devices strategically. Nightfall brought heightened tension. Every rustle, every distant howl, every subtle movement heightened their awareness. Caldwell remained vigilant, whispering instructions on silence and movement, emphasizing the importance of patience and observation. Then, a sudden movement, a large silhouette emerging from the edge of the clearing, moving with remarkable fluidity despite its size. The creature paused, its head tilting slightly, scanning their position. It emitted a series of low, rhythmic calls, each tone deliberate, each modulation conveying intent. Sarah recorded, enthralled, capturing video and audio simultaneously. Caldwell observed, noting behavior, posture, and patterns. "It's communicating. Testing boundaries, asserting presence, perhaps even observing us in return," he said. The creature's interaction with the environment was methodical, rearranging small branches, leaving tufts of fur in specific spots, and stepping lightly to avoid leaving deep impressions in certain areas. Caldwell whispered, "It's aware, intelligent, and cautious. Its behavior is far beyond instinct, it's strategy, culture, and perhaps curiosity." Night passed slowly, filled with anticipation and subtle disturbances in the forest. Every sound was analyzed, every shadow studied, and every mark documented. By dawn, the area around the clearing bore fresh tracks, new markings, and evidence of deliberate movement. Caldwell and Sarah catalogued everything meticulously, understanding the significance of each observation. "We are witnessing something extraordinary," Sarah said softly, her voice filled with awe. "This isn't just proof of existence, it's proof of intelligence, adaptation, and survival beyond human understanding." Caldwell nodded, his eyes scanning the early morning mist. "And it's ongoing. Every step we take, every observation, is part of a much larger story. We are witnessing a species that has eluded humans for centuries, operating within its own sophisticated system, aware and present. They began their careful trek back to the town, analyzing photographs and audio recordings on the way. The magnitude of what they had documented was overwhelming, evidence of intelligence, communication, and environmental awareness in a creature humanity had long dismissed as myth. Each encounter reinforced the reality that they were participants in a living narrative, not merely observers. In the days that followed, they reviewed every detail, examining tracks for strike patterns, studying the depth of footprints for weight analysis, and enhancing audio recordings to isolate tonal sequences. They cross-referenced behaviors with previous sightings, building a pattern of activity that suggested a complex social structure and adaptive intelligence. Plans for the next expedition were meticulously crafted: non-intrusive observation, detailed recording, and ethical consideration of their impact on the creature and its environment. Caldwell emphasized patience, respect, and continuous learning. Sarah focused on accurate documentation and contextual analysis. They both understood that each encounter revealed only a fraction of the species' behavior and that their work would be ongoing, requiring careful observation, humility, and restraint. As they packed equipment for the next venture, Caldwell spoke quietly, his voice carrying the weight of experience and anticipation. The forest has revealed fragments of truth, but the story is far from complete. We must approach with respect, patience, and humility. The proof is out there, waiting for those willing to observe without interference. Sarah nodded, a mixture of reverence and determination in her expression. "We are ready," she said. "Not just to witness, but to understand, to document, and to share what can be shared responsibly." With that, they stepped once more into the forest, aware that the shadows shifted subtly around them, that the intelligence they sought was observing, calculating, and continuing its existence just beyond human perception. Each footstep carried purpose, each breath was measured, and every observation was a step deeper into a world alive with mystery, awareness, and the undeniable presence of the creature they sought to understand. The forest was no longer merely a setting, it was a living entity, a participant in their journey, and somewhere within it, the creature moved, watched, and communicated, a being of intelligence and resilience, untouchable yet undeniably real. The following days in the forest became a rhythm of careful observation, methodical tracking, and quiet anticipation. Caldwell and Sarah had established a temporary base deeper within the wilderness, a modest camp camouflaged with tarps and natural debris, positioned strategically near the last known location of the creature. Their supplies were organized meticulously: cameras, audio recorders, binoculars, and notebooks were arranged for maximum efficiency, each piece of equipment serving a specific purpose. The forest, alive with unseen activity, seemed to respond to their presence in subtle ways. Branches shifted with the wind, shadows elongated in unexpected directions, and the faint murmur of distant calls echoed like a living heartbeat through the trees. Caldwell moved with the practiced precision of someone who had spent decades in the wilderness, his eyes scanning the terrain for even the slightest disturbance. "Patience is the only path forward," he said, lowering his binoculars. "We cannot force encounters. We can only observe, record, and interpret. Every step we take is part of the narrative, and the forest controls the pace." Sarah nodded, adjusting her camera and notebook, aware that the tension between skepticism and belief had finally resolved into a focused curiosity. "It feels like the forest itself is alive," she said quietly. "Every movement, every sound is communicating, even if we don't yet understand how." The tracks they had discovered previously led them into a narrow canyon, flanked by towering rock faces and dense undergrowth. The terrain was treacherous, requiring careful navigation over icy patches and loose stones. Yet each step brought them closer to evidence: freshly broken branches, fur caught on jagged bark, and subtle impressions in the soil that suggested the creature's passage had been deliberate and aware. Caldwell knelt to examine one footprint, brushing away the snow and debris to reveal the depth and pattern beneath. "Look at this stride," he whispered, tracing the impression with a gloved hand. "It's measured, balanced, almost ceremonial in its precision." The creature moves with awareness, as if negotiating the terrain with purpose, leaving markers for itself, or perhaps for others. Sarah photographed the prints from multiple angles, noting details of depth, spacing, and weight distribution. "It's incredible," she murmured. "Every step seems calculated, intentional, and intelligent. It's not just surviving here, it's thriving, controlling its environment in ways humans rarely consider." As they continued, the ambient sounds of the forest became more pronounced, the occasional snap of a branch, distant calls from birds, and the low hum of insects beginning their morning activity. Yet beneath these ordinary noises lay something extraordinary, a series of low, rhythmic vocalizations that seemed deliberate, patterned, and communicative. Caldwell paused, listening intently, the binoculars pressed to his eyes. "There," he whispered. "It's communicating. Not with us, perhaps, but within its own kind." The sequence, rhythm, and pitch suggest intelligence, social awareness, and environmental adaptation. Sarah activated her audio recorder, capturing the subtle vibrations that echoed through the canyon. Every note was analyzed, isolated, and logged, adding depth to the growing understanding of the creature's behavior. Hours passed as they followed tracks and observed signs, documenting each discovery with care. The sun climbed higher, illuminating patches of forest previously cloaked in shadow. A low mist clung to the valleys, diffusing the light and adding an ethereal quality to the landscape. In the midst of the clearing, they discovered what appeared to be a temporary resting area, flattened moss and brush arranged in circular patterns, scattered tufts of fur, and several broken branches placed with intentionality. Caldwell examined the area carefully. "This is more than a resting spot," he said. "It's a deliberate arrangement, a form of environmental manipulation. There's communication, planning, and perhaps ritualistic behavior here. This creature operates on a level of intelligence that science has yet to recognize." Sarah photographed and sketched the scene, her hand shaking slightly with excitement. "Every detail counts," she said. "If this is cultural behavior, every mark, tuft, and arrangement is part of a story, one we are witnessing firsthand." As the afternoon wore on, a figure emerged at the edge of the clearing, tall, muscular, and cloaked in dark fur, moving with deliberate caution. It paused intermittently, lifting its head, eyes glinting with awareness. Caldwell captured multiple photographs, each click of the shutter preserving the fleeting presence of an entity that had remained hidden from humanity for centuries. The creature made a low, resonant call, vibrating through the canyon like a living instrument. Sarah activated the audio recorders simultaneously, capturing every nuance of the sound. Caldwell's gaze never wavered. "It's communicating with us, in its own way," he said softly. "Not words, but intent, recognition, and perhaps curiosity. It understands our presence and reacts deliberately." The figure moved closer to the arrangement of moss and brush, pausing to manipulate a branch, leaving tufts of fur at specific points, and stepping lightly to avoid disturbing certain areas. Its behavior was methodical, purposeful, and intelligent. Caldwell whispered, "This is cognition. Culture. Awareness. It's interacting with its environment and, indirectly, with us. Every movement tells a story." Night fell, and the forest sounds deepened, the hoot of owls, the rustle of small mammals, and the distant flow of a river. Caldwell and Sarah settled in their camouflage observation point, monitoring the clearing through binoculars and infrared cameras. Each subtle disturbance, Each sound was analyzed and documented with painstaking care. Then, in the dim light, a massive silhouette emerged at the edge of the clearing, moving with fluid grace. The creature paused, head tilting as if studying them, then emitted a series of low tones, alternating in pitch and cadence, almost conversational in nature. Sarah's hands trembled as she recorded the sounds, capturing a sequence that suggested intentional communication. Caldwell studied every movement, noting posture, gaze, and interaction with the environment. "It's testing boundaries," he whispered. "Assessing us. Its intelligence is remarkable. It understands observation, adaptation, and discretion." The creature lingered for several minutes, its eyes flicking between Caldwell, Sarah, and the surrounding forest, then slowly retreated into the shadows. Dawn brought a silver mist that wrapped the clearing in ethereal light. Fresh tracks, rearranged vegetation, and tufts of fur provided tangible evidence of the night's activity. Caldwell and Sarah catalogued every detail, understanding the depth of what they had witnessed. "We've moved beyond myth," Sarah said softly. "This is intelligence, adaptation, and culture in its purest form. The forest has given us a glimpse into a world humans have ignored for centuries." Caldwell nodded, eyes scanning the early morning light filtering through the trees. "Every observation is part of a larger story, one we are just beginning to understand. We are witnesses to a species whose existence challenges our perception, a being that operates with awareness, strategy, and culture beyond our comprehension." Their return to town was quiet, contemplative. They reviewed photographs, audio recordings, and sketches, reinforcing their conclusions. The creature displayed intelligence, deliberate behavior, and environmental awareness, evidence that demanded both respect and ethical consideration in reporting. Planning for subsequent expeditions became meticulous, non-intrusive observation, careful documentation, and ongoing analysis of vocalizations and environmental manipulation. Caldwell emphasized patience, strategic placement, and minimal impact. Sarah focused on ethical reporting and contextual understanding. They understood that the forest held layers of complexity, that every encounter was only a fragment of the truth, and that the creature's behavior extended beyond simple observation. It was a narrative of intelligence, survival, and adaptation. As they prepared for the next venture, a quiet resolve settled over them. They were no longer observers merely recording evidence. They were participants in a story of existence, intelligence, and survival that had unfolded beyond human understanding. Caldwell spoke softly as they packed their gear. "The proof is out there, waiting for those patient and respectful enough to witness it. Every step we take is part of a living narrative." Sarah nodded, determination shining in her eyes. "Then we continue. Not just to observe, but to understand, document, and share responsibly what can be shared. The forest, the creature, and the story, they deserve that." With that, they stepped into the dense wilderness once more, every step measured, every breath conscious, entering a world alive with intelligence, mystery, and the undeniable presence of a being that had remained untouchable yet real for centuries. The shadows moved subtly around them, and somewhere deep within the trees, the creature continued its existence, aware, intelligent, and profoundly enigmatic. The forest seemed to shift subtly as Caldwell and Sarah ventured deeper than ever before, the trees forming dense walls of green that filtered the sunlight into muted shafts, painting the forest floor with golden patches that moved with the wind. The previous nights had imbued them with a heightened awareness. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, every faint vibration of the earth beneath their boots was processed with a mixture of anticipation and caution. Caldwell moved with deliberate care, scanning for disturbances, observing patterns, reading the forest like a manuscript of hidden knowledge. "This is no ordinary terrain," he whispered. "Every step, every break in the foliage, Every indentation tells a story. The creature leaves breadcrumbs, but only for those patient enough to see. Sarah nodded, adjusting her camera and microphone, capturing every moment with meticulous care. Her skepticism had long faded, replaced by an awe that tempered her scientific curiosity with respect. The tracks they had followed over the past weeks had led them into a narrow ravine where the air was thick with mist, and the forest seemed to close around them, creating a cathedral-like corridor where light barely penetrated. Caldwell knelt beside a footprint, brushing away dirt and debris. The depth and length of the print confirmed what they had suspected. The creature was massive, intelligent, and acutely aware of its environment. Each step is calculated, he murmured. Not random, not merely instinct. It moves with purpose, leaving patterns, signals, and traces for itself or others. It knows we are here and chooses its interaction carefully. Sarah photographed the prints from multiple angles, her hands steady despite the rising tension in the air. The forest seemed alive, each sound amplified, each shadow a potential signal. Then came a low, resonant call, echoing from the ridges above, carrying a cadence that suggested intelligence and intentional communication. Caldwell froze, raising a hand to signal silence. Sarah activated her audio recorder, capturing the sound in high fidelity. Listen, Caldwell whispered. It's deliberate, structured. There's awareness here, social intelligence, pattern recognition. It's speaking, even if we cannot yet understand the language. They moved cautiously, following the sound, every step deliberate, mindful of the fragile snow and delicate underbrush. The trail led them to a clearing surrounded by towering pines, the sunlight breaking through intermittently to illuminate the forest floor in shimmering patches. There, they discovered signs of recent activity, flattened moss and leaves arranged in circular patterns, tufts of dark fir placed intentionally, and broken branches that suggested purposeful manipulation. Caldwell studied the arrangement, his gloved fingers tracing the patterns. This is symbolic behavior, he whispered. Environmental manipulation, perhaps a form of communication or ritual. This is not random, it is deliberate, intelligent, and culturally significant. Sarah sketched the arrangement and took numerous photographs, her journal filling with detailed notes. The air was charged with anticipation as they waited, observing every subtle movement, every shift in the forest's energy. Hours passed, punctuated by distant calls, soft rustling, and the occasional sighting of shadows larger than any human or known animal. As evening approached, the temperature dropped, and a thin mist began to settle over the clearing. Caldwell suggested setting up a temporary observation point nearby, camouflaged with natural debris and positioned to monitor the clearing without interference. Sarah arranged cameras and audio recorders, each device strategically placed to maximize documentation while minimizing disruption. The night was tense, filled with the symphony of nocturnal forest life, the hoot of owls, the rustle of small mammals, and the distant flow of water. Amid these ordinary sounds were extraordinary ones, a series of low, rhythmic exhalations, deliberate in pattern and pitch, resonating through the trees and conveying intelligence and presence. Suddenly, a massive silhouette emerged at the edge of the clearing. The creature paused, head tilting as if studying them, its eyes glinting with curiosity and awareness. Caldwell raised his camera, capturing rapid-fire images while Sarah simultaneously recorded audio and video. The creature moved with fluid grace, pausing to manipulate a branch and leaving tufts of fur in specific locations. Its movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if aware that their presence was being observed and recorded. Caldwell whispered, "This is cognition, awareness, and strategy. Every action conveys meaning, every placement of fur or branch tells a story." The creature lingered for several minutes, examining the surroundings, its gaze sweeping between Caldwell, Sarah, and the environment itself. It emitted a series of low calls, alternating in tone and cadence, suggesting communication with others, or possibly acknowledgement of the humans observing it. Night deepened, and the forest became a living theater of shadows and sounds. Caldwell and Sarah remained in their observation point, documenting, analyzing, and recording, aware that each moment could yield critical evidence of intelligence, social behavior, and environmental manipulation. As the first hints of dawn touched the canopy, the creature retreated into the forest, leaving behind footprints, rearranged foliage, and tufts of fur as tangible evidence of its presence and activity. Caldwell and Sarah catalogued every detail, photographs, audio recordings, and sketches forming a comprehensive record of the encounter. "We've moved beyond myth," Sarah said softly. "We are witnessing intelligence, culture, and survival in its purest form. This forest is a living archive of a species that has remained hidden and aware for centuries." Caldwell nodded, eyes scanning the misty clearing. "Every observation is a fragment of a larger story. The creature is aware, strategic, and socially complex. We are witnessing history unfold in real time." Their trek back to their base was contemplative, the weight of discovery heavy but exhilarating. They reviewed photographs and recordings, confirming patterns of movement, environmental manipulation, and communication. Each encounter reinforced the conclusion: the creature was intelligent, aware, and capable of complex behavior, evidence that demanded both scientific inquiry and ethical responsibility. Over the following days, Caldwell and Sarah meticulously planned the next expedition: non-intrusive observation, detailed documentation, and continued study of vocalizations, patterns, and environmental interactions. Caldwell emphasized patience, strategic positioning, and minimal disruption, while Sarah focused on comprehensive recording, contextual analysis, and ethical reporting. They understood that each observation revealed only a fraction of the creature's behavior, and that the forest contained layers of complexity yet to be discovered. The anticipation of the next encounter imbued them with a sense of reverence and determination. Caldwell spoke quietly as they prepared their gear, voice tinged with both awe and resolve. "The forest has offered fragments of truth, but the narrative is ongoing. Every observation, every recording, every footprint is part of a living story we are privileged to witness." Sarah nodded, a determined glint in her eyes. "We continue, not just to observe, but to understand, document, and share responsibly. The forest, the creature, and the evidence deserve nothing less." With their gear secured and minds focused, they stepped once more into the dense forest, every movement deliberate, every breath conscious. The shadows shifted subtly around them, a reminder that the creature they sought was present, intelligent, and aware. Each step was a bridge between myth and reality, and every observation a step deeper into a world alive with mystery, strategy, and undeniable intelligence. The forest enveloped them, alive with sound, scent, and motion, and somewhere beyond sight, the creature moved silently, calculating, communicating, and surviving, a living enigma that had persisted far longer than human understanding had dared to consider. Caldwell and Sarah, now attuned to the rhythms of the forest, followed its unspoken guidance, knowing that every encounter, every observation, and every piece of evidence brought them closer to understanding a being that had defied explanation for centuries. They were no longer merely witnesses, they were participants in a story of intelligence, adaptation, and survival, a story that the forest had long kept hidden, now partially revealed to those patient and respectful enough to seek it without fear or interference. The forest seemed to thrum with life as Caldwell and Sarah ventured further than ever before, a place where the canopy became a dense tapestry of interlacing branches, filtering sunlight into fragmented pools of gold that danced across the forest floor. Every step carried a weight of anticipation and careful calculation, the snow-crusted ground bore the faintest signs of passage, each indentation, bend in a branch, or tuft of displaced moss recorded in their journals and through the lenses of cameras and audio recorders. Caldwell moved ahead with the quiet authority of a man who had spent decades in the wilderness, his eyes scanning every shadow, every movement, every subtle hint that the creature might have passed this way. "Every trace is deliberate," he murmured. "The creature leaves a story behind, but only for those patient and observant enough to decipher it." Sarah followed, her notebook filling rapidly with detailed sketches, notes, and observations. The air was thick with expectation, and a quiet reverence settled over both of them. The trail they followed led them into a narrow valley where the fog thickened and the trees loomed like ancient sentinels. The atmosphere was charged, each rustle, crackle, and distant call heightened in significance. Caldwell knelt beside a footprint partially obscured by ice and debris, brushing it carefully to reveal its full form. "Look at the depth, the pressure points, the stride," he whispered. "Every element demonstrates cognition, awareness of terrain, and purpose. This is no mere animal, it moves with intent and strategy." Sarah photographed the footprint meticulously, aware that this was evidence that could rewrite what was known about the creature. Beyond the footprint, the forest opened into a clearing, where subtle disturbances in the underbrush hinted at recent activity. The moss was flattened in deliberate patterns, small branches positioned with purpose, and tufts of dark fur left at intervals that suggested communication or marking behavior. Caldwell studied the scene intently, noting the symmetry and precision. "Environmental manipulation, ritualistic placement, communication," he murmured. "This is culture. It is aware of its surroundings and understands spatial relationships in ways humans rarely consider." Sarah set up additional cameras and strategically placed audio recorders to capture any signs of the creature's return. Hours passed in tense anticipation, the forest alive with quiet noises, the rustle of small mammals, the drip of melting snow, and distant bird calls. Then, in the shadows at the edge of the clearing, a massive silhouette emerged. It moved with deliberate grace, pausing to examine the environment, its eyes glinting with awareness and intelligence. Caldwell raised his camera, capturing high-resolution images while Sarah recorded audio, the low vibrations of the creature's calls resonating through the misty air. The creature manipulated the forest subtly, moving branches, leaving tufts of fur in precise locations, and stepping lightly to avoid disturbing certain areas. Each action seemed intentional, almost ritualistic, as if it were aware of the humans observing from the clearing. Caldwell whispered, "This is cognitive behavior, environmental strategy, and perhaps even social intelligence. Every movement conveys meaning and demonstrates awareness of both space and observers." As twilight approached, the forest took on an otherworldly quality, shadows stretching long and deep, fog rolling through the underbrush like a living presence. Caldwell and Sarah remained in their camouflage observation point, documenting every nuance, analyzing the creature's interaction with the environment and the subtle signals it seemed to leave behind. The night deepened, and the creature emerged once more, larger than the shadows that surrounded it, moving fluidly, carefully, and deliberately. Its eyes, intelligent and calculating, scanned the clearing, and it emitted a series of low, rhythmic calls that suggested communication, either within its own kind or as a response to the observers. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she recorded the sequence, capturing patterns in pitch, cadence, and tone that indicated deliberate signaling. Caldwell observed each movement, noting postures, pauses, and environmental interaction. It's testing boundaries, communicating with its environment, and perhaps evaluating us, he whispered. The creature lingered, its gaze shifting between them, then slowly retreated into the dense shadows, leaving behind footprints, rearranged foliage, and tufts of fur as tangible evidence of its presence. Dawn broke, shrouding the clearing in pale mist and silver light. The traces left by the creature were meticulously documented: tracks, symbols, and evidence of behavioral patterns. Caldwell and Sarah catalogued everything, understanding the magnitude of what they had witnessed. "This is intelligence, strategy, and culture," Sarah said softly, her voice filled with awe. "The forest has revealed a being that has persisted unseen for centuries, adapting, surviving, and interacting with its environment in ways humans cannot fully comprehend." Caldwell nodded, scanning the surrounding trees. "Every observation is a fragment of a much larger narrative. We are witnessing not just existence but adaptation, social complexity, and intelligence preserved across generations." They began their careful trek back to camp, analyzing photographs, sketches, and audio recordings along the way. Each discovery reinforced the understanding that the creature was highly aware, socially capable, and strategically manipulative of its surroundings. Every movement and trace was a deliberate act, evidence of cognition and intelligence. Over the following days, Caldwell and Sarah reviewed all collected material, enhancing images, isolating vocalizations, and analyzing environmental patterns. Plans for the next expedition were refined, emphasizing non-intrusive observation, ethical documentation, and continued study of the creature's behaviors and interactions with its environment. Caldwell emphasized patience, careful positioning, and the importance of minimal disruption, while Sarah focused on contextual analysis, responsible reporting, and thorough documentation of all traces and patterns. They both understood that their work was only beginning. The forest contained layers of complexity and intelligence that humans had never recognized, and the creature's behaviors were a narrative still unfolding. Each encounter offered new insights, new questions, and new evidence of intelligence and social structure. The anticipation of the next observation imbued them with a sense of reverence and determination. As they packed their gear for another venture, Caldwell spoke softly, his voice carrying a mix of awe and resolve. "The forest has revealed fragments of truth, but the story is ongoing. Each footprint, call, and trace is part of a living narrative we are privileged to witness." Sarah nodded, determination evident in her eyes. "We continue, not only to observe but to understand, document, and responsibly share what can be shared. The forest, the creature, and the intelligence it represents deserve nothing less." With their equipment secured and focus sharpened, they stepped once more into the wilderness, every movement deliberate, every breath conscious. The forest enveloped them, alive with sound, motion, and the subtle presence of the creature. Each step was both observation and participation, a bridge between myth and reality. Somewhere beyond sight, the being moved silently, calculating, communicating, and surviving, a living enigma that had persisted far longer than human understanding could accommodate. Caldwell and Sarah, attuned now to the rhythms and patterns of the forest, followed its unspoken guidance, knowing that every encounter, every trace, and every sound brought them closer to understanding a species whose intelligence, awareness, and adaptability challenged everything humans thought they knew about the natural world. They were no longer mere observers, they were witnesses, participants, and chroniclers of a living mystery, a story of survival, cognition, and intelligence hidden in the shadows of a forest that had long kept its secrets, now partially revealed to those patient, respectful, and perceptive enough to see. The forest had grown even more dense as Caldwell and Sarah pressed onward, the sunlight barely filtering through the interwoven canopy, leaving the forest floor in a perpetual half-light that played tricks on the ice. Each step was measured, every movement deliberate, as though the very trees were aware of their intrusion and chose to communicate silently through rustling leaves and shifting shadows. Caldwell moved ahead, eyes scanning the environment with practiced precision, noting every displaced branch, every slight indentation in the moss-covered ground, every subtle sign of passage. "The forest is alive with evidence," he whispered, crouching beside a particularly deep footprint partially hidden beneath fallen leaves. Every print tells a story, every branch displaced, every tuft of fur intelligence, strategy, awareness. This is deliberate. It is conscious of its surroundings, and of us. Sarah knelt beside him, photographing the print from multiple angles, her notebook filling rapidly with detailed sketches and observations. She had long abandoned skepticism. The weight of evidence was undeniable. It moves with purpose, she murmured. Every step, every trace, is intentional. It knows we are here, and yet it chooses to leave a trail, almost as if it wants to be seen, but only partially. Caldwell nodded, scanning the dense undergrowth ahead. The trail led them into a narrow gorge, where mist clung to the rock faces and the air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. The forest seemed to amplify every sound, the faint drip of water from a moss-covered stone, the scuttle of small creatures in the underbrush, and beneath it all, a series of low, deliberate calls that resonated with purpose. Caldwell signaled for silence and held his breath, listening. The rhythmic cadence of the calls suggested intelligence, pattern, and possible communication either within its own kind or as acknowledgement of their presence. Sarah activated her audio recorder, capturing every nuance, aware that these recordings could hold keys to understanding the creature's communication system. They advanced slowly, following the trail, noting subtle signs of passage, broken branches carefully laid aside, flattened moss forming small circles, tufts of fur placed intentionally. Caldwell knelt to inspect a particularly intriguing arrangement, branches positioned in a pattern that suggested symbolic or ritualistic behavior. "This isn't random," he whispered. "This is cultural behavior. There is strategy here, planning, even artistry. It manipulates its environment with intelligence, leaving signals for others or perhaps even for us to observe." Sarah documented everything meticulously, photographing the arrangement, sketching the positions of each branch, and taking notes on the spacing, orientation, and context. The forest around them was alive with the quiet hum of life, but beneath the natural sounds was a subtle, almost imperceptible rhythm, the low exhalations and calls of the creature as it moved just beyond sight. As twilight approached, the temperature dropped, and a thin mist began to weave through the trees, wrapping the clearing in an ethereal shroud. Caldwell suggested they establish a temporary observation point nearby, camouflaged with branches and moss to avoid detection, while Sarah positioned cameras and audio recorders to maximize documentation without disturbance. Night fell, and the forest became a living theater of sound and motion. Caldwell and Sarah remained in their hidden vantage point, documenting every subtle movement, every faint sound, every change in the environment. Then, at the edge of the clearing, a massive silhouette emerged. The creature moved deliberately, pausing to examine its surroundings, its eyes intelligent and alert. Caldwell raised his camera, capturing images in rapid succession, while Sarah simultaneously recorded audio, capturing the low, resonant vibrations of its calls. The creature interacted with the environment in methodical ways, rearranging branches, leaving tufts of fur in precise locations, stepping lightly to avoid disturbing certain areas. Each movement was deliberate, almost ritualistic, suggesting awareness of both its environment and the observers present. Caldwell whispered, "This is intelligence, strategy, and communication. Every movement conveys meaning. It is not merely surviving, it is observing, adapting, and perhaps even teaching or signaling." The creature lingered for several minutes, its gaze shifting between them, then slowly retreated into the shadows, leaving tangible evidence of its presence. Dawn brought silver light to the clearing, illuminating tracks, rearranged vegetation, and fur placements. Caldwell and Sarah catalogued every detail, understanding the significance of each trace. "This is cultural behavior," Sarah said softly. This forest is a living archive of intelligence, and we are privileged to witness it. Caldwell nodded, scanning the misty canopy. Every observation, every trace, is part of a narrative that has been unfolding for centuries, unseen and unrecorded by humans. We are only now beginning to understand. Their return to camp was quiet and contemplative, each step filled with reverence. They reviewed photographs, audio recordings, and sketches, confirming patterns of movement, environmental manipulation, and communication. The creature's intelligence, awareness, and social complexity became increasingly clear. Every footprint, every branch rearranged, every tuft of fur was evidence of deliberate action and cognition. Over the following days, Caldwell and Sarah meticulously analyzed their collected data. Photographs were enhanced to reveal finer details, audio recordings were isolated to study tonal patterns, and sketches were cross-referenced with prior observations to detect recurring behaviors. Planning for the next expedition emphasized non-intrusive observation, ethical documentation, and the study of social structures and environmental interactions. Caldwell emphasized patience and careful observation, while Sarah focused on responsible documentation and contextual analysis. They recognized that the forest held layers of intelligence and culture, that every encounter revealed only a fragment of the broader story. Each observation yielded new insights, questions, and evidence of cognition, adaptation, and strategic behavior. As they prepared for the next foray, Caldwell spoke softly, his voice filled with both reverence and determination. The forest has offered us fragments of truth, but the story is ongoing. Every call, every print, every trace is part of a living narrative we are witnessing for the first time. Sarah nodded, determination in her eyes. We continue not just to observe, but to understand, document, and responsibly share what can be shared. The intelligence, culture, and awareness of this species demand nothing less. With their gear secured and minds focused, they entered the forest once more, every footfall deliberate, every breath conscious. The shadows shifted subtly around them, a reminder that the creature they sought was present, intelligent, and aware. Each step bridged the gap between myth and reality, each observation brought them closer to understanding a species whose intelligence, awareness, and adaptability had persisted far beyond human comprehension. The forest enveloped them, alive with motion, sound, and subtle signals, and somewhere beyond their sight, the creature moved silently, observing, calculating, communicating, and surviving. Caldwell and Sarah, attuned to the rhythms of the forest, followed its unspoken guidance, recognizing that each encounter, each footprint, and each call brought them deeper into a story of survival, strategy, and intelligence hidden in plain sight. They were no longer mere observers, they were witnesses, participants, and chroniclers of a living mystery, a species whose existence challenged everything humans thought they knew about the natural world. The forest, alive and sentient in its own way, had opened a door to history. And Caldwell and Sarah were stepping through, careful, respectful, and forever changed by what they had seen. The forest at dawn held a stillness that was almost sacred, a quiet anticipation that seemed to stretch across every moss-covered branch and frost-laden leaf. Caldwell and Sarah moved carefully, their boots pressing into the soft, damp earth, each step measured, deliberate, and attuned to the subtle rhythms of the wilderness. Every shadow, every flicker of movement, every distant sound carried significance. The forest was alive with intelligence that extended beyond the observable, and they had learned to respect its unspoken language. Caldwell led the way, binoculars scanning the terrain, noting every minute disturbance in the foliage and the precise alignment of fallen branches. "This is deliberate," he murmured, crouching beside a footprint partially hidden beneath a fallen log. Every print, every mark, every displaced leaf conveys awareness, intent, and calculation. The creature knows the environment intimately and is aware of us, yet it chooses to leave traces. Sarah photographed the footprint from multiple angles, her journal filling with sketches, measurements, and observations. Skepticism had long faded, replaced by reverent curiosity. "It's like it wants to be seen," she whispered. "But only partially, only in a way it controls." The tracks led them into a narrow ravine, shrouded in mist, where sunlight barely penetrated the dense canopy. The forest amplified every sound, distant calls of birds, rustle of small mammals, and beneath it all, a series of low, rhythmic vocalizations that suggested deliberate communication. Caldwell held up a hand, signaling silence, and listened intently. "Its pattern, structure, intelligence," he whispered. "These are deliberate signals, perhaps for its kind, perhaps acknowledging our presence. We are part of this ecosystem, but not the dominant observers here, we are students of it." Sarah activated her audio recorder, capturing every nuance, the vibrations resonating through the cold air and recording an intelligence previously unimagined. Moving cautiously, they followed the sound, observing subtle environmental cues, bent branches forming symbolic shapes, flattened moss arranged in circular patterns, and tufts of dark fur intentionally left in specific locations. Caldwell examined one arrangement closely, tracing a branch with a gloved hand. "Environmental manipulation, signaling, possibly ritual," he murmured. "This is behavior we cannot categorize as instinct alone. It is intelligence, culture, and strategy combined." Sarah documented the scene with photographs and sketches, noting the precise spacing, orientation, and contextual significance. As twilight approached, the temperature dropped, and fog settled among the trees, shrouding the clearing in a soft, ethereal light. Caldwell suggested a temporary observation post camouflage with moss and branches to avoid detection. Sarah strategically positioned cameras and audio devices to capture the subtle interactions without disturbing the environment. The night was tense, filled with a symphony of forest sounds, owls, small mammals, and the distant gurgle of a stream. Beneath these ordinary noises, however, were extraordinary vibrations, low, resonant exhalations that indicated intentional movement, awareness, and perhaps communication. Suddenly, a massive silhouette emerged at the edge of the clearing, moving with deliberate grace. Its eyes glinted, intelligent and alert, scanning the environment with apparent calculation. Caldwell raised his camera, capturing images while Sarah recorded audio, the low, rhythmic calls reverberating through the clearing. The creature interacted with the forest methodically, rearranging branches, leaving tufts of fur, stepping with care to avoid disturbing certain areas. Every movement was purposeful, ritualistic, and indicative of intelligence. Caldwell whispered, "Observe closely, every action conveys meaning. This is cognition, strategy, and environmental awareness. It is not merely surviving, it is communicating, adapting, and interacting with its world and perhaps even with us." The creature lingered for several minutes, shifting its gaze between them and the surrounding forest, then retreated into the shadows, leaving behind footprints, rearranged vegetation, and tufts of fur as evidence of its presence. Dawn brought silver light to the clearing, illuminating the traces left behind. Caldwell and Sarah catalogued every detail, photographs, audio recordings, and sketches forming a comprehensive record of the night's events. "We are witnessing intelligence, culture, and strategy," Sarah said softly. "The forest is alive with a species that has thrived unseen for centuries, adapting and interacting with its environment in ways we are only beginning to understand." Caldwell nodded. "Every observation, every trace, is part of a narrative that has been unfolding long before humans arrived. We are chroniclers, not controllers, witnessing history in real time." Their trek back to camp was contemplative, each step heavy with the weight of understanding. They reviewed photographs, audio, and notes, reinforcing patterns of movement, environmental manipulation, and social complexity. Evidence of cognition, strategy, and environmental awareness grew more compelling with each encounter. Over the following days, they meticulously analyzed all data, enhancing images, isolating tonal patterns in recordings, and cross-referencing environmental cues to detect recurring behaviors. Future expeditions were planned with precision, non-intrusive observation, ethical documentation, and continued study of behavioral patterns and social interactions. Caldwell emphasized patience, minimal disturbance, and strategic placement, while Sarah focused on contextual documentation, ethical responsibility, and comprehensive recording. They understood that every observation revealed only a fraction of the creature's complex behavior and that the forest contained layers of intelligence yet to be uncovered. Each encounter brought new questions, deeper insights, and further evidence of intelligence, strategy, and culture. Preparing for the next venture, Caldwell spoke softly, his voice a mixture of reverence and determination. The forest has offered fragments of truth, but the narrative is ongoing. Each footprint, call, and trace is part of a story that has existed far longer than we have. Sarah nodded, determination etched in her expression. We will continue not just to observe, but to understand, document, and responsibly share what we can. The forest and the creature it shelters deserve nothing less. With gear secured and focus sharpened, they stepped once more into the wilderness, every movement deliberate, every breath conscious. The forest, alive with subtle signals and hidden life, enveloped them. Somewhere beyond sight, the creature moved silently, observing, communicating, and surviving, a living enigma that had existed far longer than human understanding could fathom. Caldwell and Sarah, attuned to the rhythms of the forest, followed its unspoken guidance, recognizing that each encounter, trace, and call brought them closer to understanding a species whose intelligence, awareness, and adaptability defied conventional knowledge. They were no longer mere observers, they were participants in a living narrative of survival, cognition, and culture, chronicling a story that had remained hidden in the shadows of the forest for centuries, now partially revealed to those patient, respectful, and perceptive enough to witness it. The forest at dawn was shrouded in an almost mystical stillness, a quiet anticipation that seemed to hang in the air, thick and tangible, pressing upon every leaf, branch, and frozen droplet of dew. Caldwell and Sarah moved with careful precision, their boots sinking slightly into the soft, frost-kissed soil, each step measured and deliberate. The previous weeks of trekking and observation had honed their senses, attuning them to the subtle rhythms and hidden cues of the forest. Every crack of a twig, every faint rustle of leaves, every distant call of an unseen creature was absorbed and catalogued in their minds as data, evidence, and insight into a world they were only beginning to comprehend. Caldwell led the way, scanning the dense undergrowth with binoculars, noting every deviation from the natural order, every small indentation in the moss, every tuft of displaced fur. "Look at this," he whispered, kneeling beside a footprint partially obscured by fallen leaves and pine needles. Every mark is deliberate, pressure points, stride length, placement, all suggest conscious movement, awareness, and strategy. This is intelligence manifested in its interaction with the environment. Sarah photographed the print meticulously from multiple angles, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Skepticism had long given way to awe, replaced by a profound sense of respect. "It's controlling the narrative," she whispered. "It chooses what we see, what we interpret, and what remains hidden. Every trace is a statement of presence and awareness." The trail led them into a deep ravine where the fog thickened, wrapping the landscape in a muted silver glow. The forest amplified every sound, the distant murmur of a stream, the scuttling of small mammals, and beneath it all, low, resonant calls that carried an almost deliberate cadence. Caldwell signaled for silence and listened intently. Pattern, structure, intention, he murmured. These are not random. This is communication, awareness encoded in sound, perhaps directed toward its own kind, perhaps even acknowledging us. Sarah activated her audio recorder, capturing every nuance of the low, rhythmic tones, knowing that each vibration held clues to understanding a species previously considered myth. They moved cautiously, following the subtle cues left behind, branches bent in patterns that suggested symbolic placement, moss flattened in deliberate arrangements, tufts of fur positioned as if marking territory or signaling passage. Caldwell examined one particular configuration of branches and leaves, tracing its outline with a gloved hand. Environmental manipulation, ritualized behavior, possibly communication, this is far beyond instinct. It is intelligence, culture, and strategy intertwined. Every choice, every placement is calculated. Sarah documented the scene thoroughly, photographing the setup from multiple angles and sketching its intricate details. As twilight approached, the temperature dropped, and a dense fog settled over the clearing, giving the environment an almost otherworldly quality. Caldwell suggested establishing a concealed observation post nearby, using moss and branches to remain hidden, while Sarah strategically positioned cameras and audio devices to record any movement or interaction. Night descended with an eerie quiet, punctuated only by the calls of nocturnal wildlife. Beneath the ordinary sounds were extraordinary vibrations, low, measured exhalations that suggested deliberate movement and intelligence. Suddenly, a massive silhouette emerged at the edge of the clearing. It moved with deliberate grace, pausing periodically to survey its surroundings, its eyes glinting with awareness and calculation. Caldwell raised his camera, capturing images in rapid succession, while Sarah recorded the low, resonant calls that reverberated through the night. The creature interacted with its environment methodically, rearranging branches, leaving tufts of fur, and stepping lightly to avoid disturbing certain areas. Each movement conveyed deliberate intention, as if it were aware of being observed and responding to the presence of the humans. Caldwell whispered, "Observe its strategy, the awareness, the cognition, the communication through movement and manipulation. This is not survival alone, it is intelligence, interaction, and perhaps even teaching or signaling." The creature lingered for several minutes, its gaze sweeping between them and the surrounding forest, then retreated into the dense shadows, leaving behind footprints, rearranged vegetation, and fur as evidence of its presence. Dawn arrived, washing the clearing in pale silver light and revealing the traces of the night's activity in stark clarity. Caldwell and Sarah meticulously catalogued every detail, photographs, audio recordings, and sketches forming a comprehensive record of behavior, environment, and evidence. "We are witnessing intelligence, culture, and strategy," Sarah said softly, or evident in her voice. "The forest is a living archive of a species that has thrived, unseen and aware, for centuries." Caldwell nodded, scanning the misty expanse. "Every observation, every trace, every call is a fragment of a narrative unfolding across generations. We are privileged witnesses to history itself, chronicling behaviors never before recorded by humans." Their return to camp was reflective, each step measured and contemplative. They reviewed photographs, sketches, and audio recordings, confirming recurring patterns of movement, environmental manipulation, and social interaction. The evidence of intelligence, awareness, and complex behavior grew more compelling with every encounter. Over the following days, they continued meticulous analysis, enhancing photographs to reveal subtle details, isolating vocal sequences to study tonal patterns, and cross-referencing environmental cues to detect recurring behaviors. Future expeditions were carefully planned, non-intrusive observation, ethical documentation, and ongoing study of social behaviors and environmental manipulation. Caldwell stressed patience, careful positioning, and minimal disruption, while Sarah emphasized responsible documentation, contextual analysis, and comprehensive recording. Both understood that each observation revealed only a fragment of the creature's behavior and intelligence, and that the forest contained layers of sophistication and culture yet to be uncovered. Each encounter provided new insights, raised new questions, and reinforced evidence of cognition, strategy, and environmental awareness. As they prepared for the next venture, Caldwell spoke softly, his voice a mixture of reverence and determination. The forest has revealed fragments of truth, but the story is ongoing. Every footprint, every call, every trace is a piece of a narrative that has existed far longer than we have. Sarah nodded, determination etched in her expression. We continue, not merely to observe, but to understand, document, and responsibly share what can be shared. The intelligence and culture we witness demand nothing less. With gear secured and focus sharpened, they stepped once more into the forest, every footfall deliberate, every breath conscious. The forest, alive with subtle signals, movement, and unseen observers, enveloped them. Somewhere beyond sight, the creature moved silently, calculating, communicating, surviving, a living enigma that had persisted far longer than human understanding could imagine. Caldwell and Sarah, now attuned to the rhythms of the forest, followed its unspoken guidance, recognizing that every encounter, trace, and call brought them deeper into a story of intelligence, strategy, and survival hidden in plain sight. They were no longer mere observers, they had become participants, witnesses, and chroniclers of a living mystery, a species whose existence challenged everything humans had thought they knew about the natural world, a narrative long concealed in the shadows of an ancient forest, now slowly revealed to those patient, respectful, and perceptive enough to see. The forest at first light carried a heavy, almost sacred stillness, a silence that pressed against every leaf, every branch, every inch of the snow-dusted earth. Caldwell and Sarah moved slowly, their senses heightened, attuned to subtle signs, minor disturbances, and the faint echoes of a presence that had eluded human eyes for centuries. Every step was deliberate, every breath measured, as though even the act of moving might disturb an ancient rhythm of life carefully preserved in the shadows of the forest. Caldwell led, eyes sweeping across the dense undergrowth, noting the minutest details, an indentation in moss here, a bent branch there, the glint of sunlight on fur snagged in bark. "Look at this," he whispered, kneeling beside a footprint partially obscured by snow and frost. The pressure, the stride, the placement, every movement is calculated. It is aware of its environment, aware of us, and it is communicating through its presence and traces. This is not instinct alone. This is intelligence in motion. Sarah photographed the print meticulously from multiple angles, her journal filling with precise sketches, measurements, and notes. The disbelief she had once harbored had been completely replaced by reverent awe. "It's shaping the narrative," she murmured, eyes wide with recognition. "It chooses what we see, what we understand, and what remains hidden. Every mark is intentional, every trace a statement of existence and awareness." The tracks led them to a narrow valley where morning fog rolled in like a living, breathing veil. The canopy above seemed almost oppressive, filtering the sunlight into ghostly rays that glimmered across frost-crusted leaves and frozen puddles. Every distant sound, the call of a bird, the scuffle of a rodent, the whisper of wind, carried an amplified significance, and beneath it all were the low, rhythmic vocalizations that Caldwell had learned to recognize as deliberate communication. He froze and raised a hand. "Hear that? Structured. Patterned. Intelligence encoded in sound. Perhaps a message for its own kind." perhaps acknowledgement of us. We are students here, not masters. We witness, we respect. Sarah activated the audio recorder, capturing each vibration as though it were a tangible object, feeling the resonance move through her chest and recording something far older than modern human comprehension. They followed the cues, noticing symbolic arrangements in the forest, branches bent into geometric forms, moss flattened in circular patterns, tufts of dark fur placed with intention, marks that hinted at ritual, territory, or communication. Caldwell studied one arrangement, tracing the lines of branches and leaves with gloved fingers. Environmental manipulation, signaling, possibly ritual. This is deliberate culture, intelligence, strategy. It is aware not only of its environment but of how its actions are perceived. Sarah documented everything in exhaustive detail: photographs, sketches, notes, precise measurements, contextual observations. The forest seemed alive, breathing, aware. As the late afternoon approached, a thick fog enveloped the clearing, transforming it into a dreamscape of muted colors and muted sounds. Caldwell suggested setting up a concealed observation post, camouflaged with natural materials to avoid disturbance, while Sarah strategically placed cameras and microphones to capture any movement. Night fell, bringing an almost palpable tension, a symphony of nocturnal wildlife punctuated by the low, deliberate vibrations of the creature itself. A massive silhouette appeared at the clearing's edge, moving with deliberate grace, pausing frequently to survey its surroundings. Its eyes glinted with intelligence, scanning the terrain, absorbing every nuance. Caldwell raised his camera, capturing rapid-fire images, while Sarah recorded audio, every low, resonant vibration preserved for analysis. The creature manipulated its environment with methodical precision, arranging branches, leaving tufts of fur, stepping lightly to avoid disturbing certain areas. Every movement was purposeful, a language of behavior, intelligence, and awareness. Caldwell whispered, "Observe its strategy, cognition, and communication. This is not merely survival, it is interaction, teaching, and adaptation. Every action conveys meaning and demonstrates awareness of observers." The creature lingered for minutes, then retreated slowly into the shadows, leaving behind footprints, rearranged foliage, and tufts of fur, evidence of its presence and intelligence. Dawn arrived, silver light filtering through the fog, revealing the marks and signs left behind with startling clarity. Caldwell and Sarah meticulously catalogued each detail, creating a complete record of traces, movements, and sounds. "We are witnessing culture, intelligence, and strategy," Sarah said softly, awe in her voice. "This forest holds a species that has survived unseen for centuries, adapting, thriving, and interacting with its environment in ways humans have ignored or denied." Caldwell nodded, eyes sweeping the misty expanse. "Each trace, each footprint, each call is part of a narrative that has existed far longer than humanity has. We are witnesses, chroniclers, and students of this story. It is history unfolding in real time." Their trek back to camp was contemplative, each step imbued with reflection and reverence. Reviewing photographs, sketches, and audio recordings, they confirmed recurring patterns of movement, social interaction, and environmental manipulation. Every encounter strengthened the evidence of intelligence, awareness, and behavioral complexity. Over the subsequent days, they analyzed every detail, enhancing images to reveal subtle clues, isolating vocal patterns, and cross-referencing environmental signs to detect recurring behaviors. Future expeditions were planned with extreme care, emphasizing non-intrusive observation, ethical documentation, and comprehensive study of social structures and environmental manipulation. Caldwell emphasized patience, careful placement, and minimal interference, while Sarah focused on responsible reporting, contextual analysis, and thorough documentation. They understood that each observation revealed only fragments of a species that had thrived for centuries, that the forest contained layers of intelligence and culture waiting to be understood. Every encounter offered new insights, raised new questions, and reinforced evidence of cognition, adaptation, and social intelligence. Preparing for the next venture, Caldwell spoke softly, reverence and resolve woven through his tone. The forest has revealed fragments of truth, but the narrative is ongoing. Each footprint, each call, each trace is part of a story older than we are. Sarah nodded, determination etched on her face. We continue not merely to observe, but to understand, to document, and to share responsibly. The intelligence and culture we witness demand nothing less. With gear secured and senses alert, they step once more into the forest, every movement intentional, every breath conscious. The trees envelop them, alive with subtle signs and unseen observers. Somewhere in the shadows, the creature moves silently, calculating, communicating, surviving, a living enigma persisting far longer than human understanding could imagine. Caldwell and Sarah, attuned to the forest rhythms, followed its unspoken guidance, aware that each encounter, trace, and call brought them deeper into the story of a species whose intelligence, awareness, and adaptability had defied human comprehension. They were no longer mere witnesses, they were participants, chroniclers of a living mystery, custodians of a narrative long concealed in the shadows, now revealed to those patient, respectful, and perceptive enough to see. And as the sun climbed, casting light over the frost-laden forest, they paused, listening. The low, rhythmic call returned, familiar yet incomprehensible, resonating across the trees like a message carried through time. Caldwell lowered his camera, and Sarah held her breath, both understanding fully that this was not the end, but a beginning, a call to continue, to bear witness, to honor a presence humanity had long denied, a being that remained out there, intelligent, aware, and alive, in the heart of the forest, as it always had been.